Let go of me." Emily's voice cut through the restaurant like a blade, but her hands were already moving, grabbing the lapels of a man she had never met, pulling him forward, pressing her mouth against his in front of 40 witnesses and 12 loaded guns. She felt the entire room stop breathing. She felt him go rigid against her. And in the half-second before his bodyguards could react, she heard exactly what she needed to hear: the distant sound of a car door opening across the street, a shooter abandoning his position. She had saved a stranger's life. She just didn't know yet that she had also destroyed her own. If this is your first time here, subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The coffee was going cold. Emily Carter noticed that first the way the steam had stopped rising from the ceramic mug sitting on table 4, the way the afternoon light had shifted from gold to gray without her paying attention, the way 20 minutes had passed since she'd promised herself she would refill it. She had been standing at the window again. She had been doing that a lot lately, standing at the front window of her father's old restaurant, watching the street move without her. It was a habit she'd tried to break for years. Her father used to say that a person who watches the street is a person who is waiting for something to find them. He said it like a warning. She had never understood it as a child. She understood it perfectly now. "Emily." Rose's voice came from the back, warm and slightly impatient. "Table 6 needs the check." "Got it," Emily said, and she turned away from the window. She was 28 years old, and she looked younger than that dark hair pulled back face without makeup. The practical build of someone who spent 12-hour shifts on her feet between this restaurant and the hospital where she worked 3 days a week as an emergency room nurse. She moved quickly and efficiently through the small dining room, dropping the check at table 6, clearing the plates from table 2, stopping to refill the water for the elderly couple by the door who came every Thursday without fail. Normal, steady, safe. That was the life she had built, brick by careful brick, since she was 19 years old, and walked away from everything she had been born into. She didn't think about the past. She had gotten very good at not thinking about it. She kept her hands busy, her schedule full, her mind occupied with small, manageable problems. The espresso machine needed servicing. The Thursday delivery was short 2 cases of San Pellegrino. Rose's nephew was late again, and that meant Emily would close alone. These were the problems she allowed herself. These were the only problems she allowed herself. She was refilling the water pitcher from the back station when she heard the sound. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing nobody ever understood about danger. It rarely announced itself with drama. What Emily heard was a car window rolling down across the street. That was all. A mechanical hum, very slight on a street where car windows were always rolling up and down. But the angle was wrong. She didn't know she had registered that yet. Her conscious mind was still thinking about San Pellegrino and the espresso machine. But something older than her conscious mind, something her father had built into her with years of quiet, patient instruction, had already cataloged the detail and was sending up a red flag. She set the water pitcher down. She walked back to the front window. Across the street stood Martino's, the Italian restaurant that had been there for 30 years and had changed ownership twice in the last decade, without anyone in the neighborhood being quite sure who owned it now. It was the kind of place where the menu never changed, but the clientele did. Where men in good suits came for lunch meetings, and the tables by the window were always reserved, and the back room had a door that stayed closed. Emily had never eaten there. She made a point of not eating there. Today, the front windows of Martino's were full. She could see figures through the glass, the shapes of men sitting at long tables. The way the room held a particular density that meant something significant was happening inside. Power gatherings had a certain weight to them, even viewed through 2 panes of glass and 50 feet of street. She had grown up reading that weight in rooms. She had spent years pretending she didn't know how. She looked at the cars parked along the block. Her eyes moved without her permission, running the line of vehicles the way her father had taught her, checking angles, checking sight lines, checking which windows were down, in weather that didn't call for open windows. There, 3rd car from the corner. Black sedan, slightly tinted glass parked against the flow of traffic, in a spot that was technically illegal, but that no one was going to ticket because of how it was positioned far enough back to be overlooked close enough to have a direct angle through Martino's front window to the center table. The window was cracked, not all the way down, just enough. Emily felt her hands go cold. She looked back at Martino's. At the man seated at the center table, the one all the other men were positioned around, not in a decorative way, but in a protective way, the way planets orbit a sun without being asked. She couldn't see his face clearly. She could see the way he sat, the way the room organized itself around him without appearing to. She had grown up watching men sit like that. She knew exactly what it meant. She also knew that the angle from the black sedan to the center of Martino's front window was perfect. Clean. The kind of shot a professional would take 2 weeks to select a position for, and then wait for the right moment to execute. The right moment was now. She could see it, the subtle shift in the sedan's interior, the slight movement that meant a position was being settled, a breath being regulated, a finger finding a trigger. She had maybe 10 seconds, possibly less. Her mind ran the options in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She could call 911 too slow. She could shout from the window she would be dead before the sound traveled across the street, and he wouldn't move in time anyway. She could run to the sedan wrong direction, she would never close the distance. The only thing that would work was breaking the shot. The only way to break the shot was to put something in the way. The only something available was herself. She was already moving before she finished the thought. Rosa called after her. She didn't hear it. She was out the front door and into the street, crossing in the middle of the block, not looking at the sedan, because looking at the sedan would tell the shooter she knew, and if the shooter knew, she knew he would take the shot early. She walked fast. She kept her eyes forward. She counted steps. Martino's entrance had 2 guards, large men in dark clothes, who stood outside the door with their hands clasped in front of them like professional mourners, except for the way their eyes moved. They saw her coming. She watched their hands shift. She didn't slow down. "Hey," the first guard started. She walked directly between them, which was not something anyone did, and that fact alone bought her half a second of stunned paralysis from both men. She pushed through the front door. The room hit her like a wall. 40-some people, maybe more, all male except for 3 women who were clearly there in a professional capacity. Round tables, white linen, the smell of good red wine, and expensive suits, and the particular tension of men who spent their lives watching the door. Every head turned when she entered. Every pair of eyes landed on her with the cold assessment of people who had learned to treat unknown variables as threats. She registered all of it and dismissed it. She was looking at the man at the center table. He was looking at her. She had maybe 4 seconds. She crossed the room in what felt like slow motion and what was probably the fastest she had ever moved in her adult life. She heard chairs scraping, heard the low sounds of men getting to their feet, heard someone say her name. Not her name, not Emily Carter, but something else, something close, and then she was at the table. He rose slightly, not in welcome, but in the instinctive response of a man who never let anyone come that close without standing to meet them. She grabbed his lapels. She pulled him toward her. She kissed him. The sound the room made was not a sound. It was the absolute cessation of sound, the specific silence that happens when 40 trained men who have seen everything simultaneously see something they have no category for. He went rigid. She felt his hands come up not to embrace her, but to grip her arms controlled. Iron, the grip of a man who was 1/2 second from throwing her across the room. She pressed forward instead of pulling back. She put her hand against the back of his neck, turning his head, turning both of them slightly so that his body was between her and the window. She counted. 1, 2. She heard it then, not a shot, but the sound of not a shot. The absence of what should have happened. And in that absence, from across the street, the distant mechanical hum of a car window rolling back up. The shooter had lost his angle. She pulled back. She was breathing hard. She looked up at him. He was looking down at her with the expression of a man trying to decide whether he was furious, confused, or something else entirely, and landing somewhere in the center of all 3 that had no name she could give it. "There's a black sedan," she said, keeping her voice low and even. "Third from the corner, wrong direction window was cracked. You need to have someone move on it now. 2 minutes and he'll be gone." He stared at her. Behind her, she could hear the room starting to breathe again, which meant the guards were moving, which meant weapons were being readied and pointed at her back, which meant she had approximately 15 seconds before this situation became significantly more complicated. "Now," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. He lifted one hand, barely the smallest possible gesture, the kind of gesture that only means something if everyone in the room has been trained to read it, and she heard the controlled scramble of men moving. Then he looked back at her. "Who are you?" he said. His voice was low, precise. The voice of a man who had spent decades saying exactly what he meant and nothing more. "Nobody," Emily said. "I work across the street." He looked at her for a long moment. "Nobody," he repeated, and the word sounded different in his mouth than it had in hers. "Does not walk into the middle of a room like this and do what you just did." She didn't answer that. "My guards are going to want to speak with you," he said. "I know. You're not afraid of that." It wasn't a question. "I'm afraid of plenty of things," she said. "That's not one of them." He studied her with the focused attention of a man who had built an empire on reading people correctly. "Sit down," he said. She sat. His name was Alexander Moretti. She knew that before she walked through the door. Everyone in New York knew that name the way everyone in a city knows the name of a storm that has already hit once. He was 41 years old and had controlled the East Coast's most powerful organized crime family since he was 32, when his uncle Marcus Moretti died, in a way that was officially listed as cardiac arrest, and that nobody who knew anything believed for a single moment. He had never been charged with anything. He had never been publicly photographed in a compromising context. He had never given an interview, made a statement, or acknowledged any aspect of his reputation in any public forum. He was also, Emily noted with the clinical detachment she had spent years perfecting, extremely good-looking, in the specific way of men who have never needed to be charming, because the world rearranged itself around them regardless. She filed that observation away and did not think about it again. 2 of his men were back within 4 minutes. She watched Alexander's face as they spoke to him in low tones. The sedan had moved. Driver unknown plates came back to a rental agency in Queens. A gun bag was found, dropped in the gutter, 2 cars down. Professional. Clean exit. A shooter who knew his job. Alexander's expression didn't change while they spoke. That told her more about him than anything else could have. "The shot was meant for you," she said when his men had stepped back. "I'm aware of that. Whoever arranged it has been watching Martino's for at least a week," she said. "That position wasn't improvised. The timing, the angle, the car direction, somebody scouted this." The man to Alexander's left, broad-shouldered, mid-40s. The watchful eyes of someone whose job was to never be surprised, looked at her with a new quality of attention that she recognized and didn't particularly enjoy. "How do you know what a scouted position looks like?" Alexander asked. "I watch things," she said. "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." The table between them held the remains of a meal nobody had finished. She looked at it because looking at the table was easier than holding his gaze for the length of time that this conversation seemed to require. And she had already decided some minutes ago that this man was the kind of person whose sustained attention could do things to your composure if you weren't very careful. "You work across the street," he said. "Yes." "In the coffee shop?" "Restaurant. It was my father's." "And you happened to be watching my window at the exact moment a professional shooter was setting up a shot?" "Yes." "And you understood what you were seeing?" "Yes." "And you ran across the street, walked past 2 guards, and kissed me in front of my entire organization." She looked at him. "I would characterize it slightly differently." "How would you characterize it?" "I put my body between you and the window," she said. The kissing was the fastest way to make it look like something other than what it was. Something very brief happened in his expression. It was gone before she could fully catalog it. "You were protecting the cover," he said. If he saw a woman grab you in some kind of emotional confrontation, he hesitates. He needs a clean shot. You're tangled up with someone. He waits, he reassesses, he loses his moment. She shrugged. It was the logical move. The logical move, he repeated slowly. Yes. For a woman who works in a restaurant. She said nothing. He leaned forward very slightly, just enough to change the angle of the conversation. "What's your name?" he said. "Emily." Emily what? She had been Emily Carter for 9 years. She had a driver's license with that name. A nursing certification with that name. A lease. A bank account. A life. She answered to it without thinking. It had become the truest version of herself she knew. She said it without hesitation. Carter. He held her gaze for a moment that stretched slightly longer than it should have. "Emily Carter," he said. "Yes. All right, Emily Carter." He sat back. "My men are going to have some questions for you. Standard procedure, nothing to be concerned about. And then someone will see you home." "I can see myself home." "I'm sure you can," he said. "Someone will see you home anyway." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the absolute pleasant implacability of a man who had not needed to raise his voice in approximately a decade. She decided very calmly that she did not like Alexander Moretti at all. She also decided with equal calm that this was going to be extremely complicated. The questioning took 40 minutes. The man who conducted it was the broad-shouldered one. His name was Donovan. She learned, and he was Alexander's head of security, which meant he was very good at asking questions that sounded casual and were not. He had a notepad that he never wrote in, and he sat across from her in a private room off Martino's back hallway with the patient energy of a man who had done this many times and was in no hurry. "Where do you live?" he asked. She told him. "How long have you worked at the restaurant?" 6 years. It was my father's. He passed. I kept it going." "And you work at a hospital too?" 3 shifts a week, emergency nursing." "That's a lot of hours." "I like to be busy." He made a small, thoughtful sound. "You said you noticed the car because the window angle seemed wrong." "That's right." "What does a wrong angle look like?" "It's about the context," she said. "A window rolled down makes sense when it's warm, when someone's smoking, when traffic has stopped. When it's 45 degrees outside and the car is parked against traffic in an illegal spot with a clear line to a restaurant window, the window being cracked is a detail that doesn't fit the rest of the picture." Donovan studied her. "And you recognized that instantly." "I noticed it," she said. "Then I thought about it for maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds, he said. "About that. Most people wouldn't notice that in 3 hours." She kept her face pleasant and said nothing. He wrote something down that time. She resisted the urge to try to read it. "Did you know who was inside Martino's?" he asked. "I knew the kind of meeting it was." "What kind of meeting was it?" "The kind where the wrong answer is a problem," she said. "I grew up in this neighborhood. I know what Martino's is." "And you walked in anyway." "Somebody was about to get killed," she said. "Yes, I walked in anyway." Donovan looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. That was all he said. But something had shifted in his assessment of her, and she could feel it, and she was not entirely sure whether it had shifted in a direction that was better or worse for her. She was escorted back to the restaurant by 2 men who were polite and silent, and who waited outside while she collected her bag and told Rosa that she had a headache and was going to go home early and that she was sorry about the tables. Rosa looked at the 2 men visible through the window and asked no questions, which was one of the things Emily loved most about Rosa. The men walked her to her apartment building 4 blocks away. They did not come inside. They stood at the curb and watched her go through the door. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed. She thought about Alexander Moretti's eyes, gray cool. The eyes of a man who calculated everything, and the way they had changed in the single moment when she told him about the angle of the shot. He hadn't been scared. That was the thing. She had walked into a room full of men at the moment when someone had just attempted to kill their leader, and not one of them had been visibly afraid, and Alexander Moretti least of all. He had been alert. He had been angry, she thought, in a controlled way that was almost indistinguishable from calm. He had been something else too, something she didn't have a clean word for, something that looked like the very first edge of curiosity. She thought about the shooter, the clean exit, the professional setup. She thought about the fact that whoever had arranged this knew Alexander's schedule, his location, his habits well enough to plan a shot in a restaurant window. That kind of knowledge didn't come from outside a circle. That came from inside. She lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling, and told herself it wasn't her problem. She had done what she could do. The man was alive. The shooter was gone. She had given Donovan everything that was useful and nothing that was dangerous, and now it was finished, and tomorrow she would go back to work, and the day after that she would go to the hospital, and this would become one of those stories she would never tell anyone about the strange afternoon in October when she walked into a room she never should have entered. She told herself that. She almost believed it. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up. Unknown number. She answered. "Miss Carter." It was Donovan's voice. "Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you again tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. A car will come." She looked at the ceiling. "Is that a request?" she said. A pause. "It's a very polite one," Donovan said. She thought about saying no. She thought about what saying no would mean, and what saying yes would mean, and whether the difference between those two things was as significant as it felt in this moment, or whether the decision had already been made for her the moment she walked through Martino's door. 9 o'clock, she said. "Yes, ma'am." She hung up. She lay in the dark for a long time. She thought about her father. Daniel Russo had been, by most measures, not a good man. He had moved in circles she had spent her adult life avoiding. He had made choices that cost people things she couldn't calculate. He had also been in the privacy of their home, the most careful and attentive and quietly loving father she could have imagined, and those two facts had never reconciled themselves in her understanding, and she had stopped trying to reconcile them years ago. What he had given her in addition to his love and his name and the restaurant she still ran was a particular education. Not formal. Never formal. He had taught her to notice things, to watch the way people moved in rooms, the way conversations changed, when power entered or left, the way danger carried a specific frequency that could be learned to hear. He had taught her when she was 12 how to read a sightline. He had never told her why. She had understood at 12 that you didn't ask why. You learned what you were taught. You kept it somewhere quiet inside yourself. You hoped you never needed it. She was 28 years old, and she had needed it today. She wondered what her father would have thought about that. She thought he probably would have been proud, which was a thought she pushed away as quickly as it came, because her father's pride had always had a cost she didn't want to think about. She slept badly. She dreamed about a black sedan with a window cracked open, and the sound of not a shot and gray eyes that looked at her like she was something that needed to be understood before it could be trusted. The car came at exactly 9 o'clock. It was a black SUV current model, no visible plates, which told her something. The driver was a man she hadn't seen the previous day, young professional, eyes forward, no small talk. She had spent 20 minutes in front of her mirror deciding what to wear and hated herself for it. She wore what she always wore. Jeans, clean shirt, the good boots her father had given her for her 21st birthday that she kept in perfect condition because they were the last thing he'd given her before he died. The drive took 12 minutes. She didn't try to track the route with any precision. She noted the general direction, the neighborhood, the fact that they pulled into an underground garage that suggested a building with serious security infrastructure. She filed it. She was taken to an office on a high floor. The office was not what she had expected, which she recognized meant she had expected something, which meant she had formed impressions she hadn't admitted to herself. She had expected something that looked powerful and deliberate. What she found was a room that looked used, books on the shelves that had clearly been opened, papers on the desk that were actually papers rather than props. A window that faced north over the city in the gray October light. Alexander Moretti was standing at that window when she entered. He turned when he heard her come in. He was in a different suit than yesterday, this one darker, more minimal, and he looked like he had slept approximately 4 hours, which made 2 of them. "Coffee," he said. "Please." It appeared from a side table, a small pot already prepared, which meant he had expected her to say yes, which meant he had decided before she arrived what kind of conversation this would be. Or he had simply prepared for both possibilities and was covering one outcome. She wasn't sure yet which. She took the coffee. She sat in the chair across from his desk, because he had not invited her to sit, and therefore sitting in the chair across from the desk was the correct move. It told him she would not wait to be managed. He noticed. She could see him notice. He sat on the edge of the desk rather than behind it. That was interesting. "I had my people look into you," he said. "Of course you did." Emily Carter, 28, emergency nurse, 3 shifts weekly at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Took over management of a family restaurant in the East Village 6 years ago following the death of her father. He paused. No known affiliations, no criminal record, no significant background of any kind. She drank her coffee. It was very good coffee. "All accurate," she said. "The name Carter," he said. "When did you start using that name?" She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "It's my name," she said. "It's a name," he said. "It's not the one you were born with." The room was very quiet. She had known somewhere in the back of her mind that this was possible. She had built her life carefully, but careful construction doesn't mean invisible foundations. The right resources, the right people, enough time, a person could find the original materials underneath the renovation. "What name do you think I was born with?" she said. "I don't think," he said. "I know, Russo." She said nothing. "Emily Russo," he said. "Daniel Russo's daughter." She set the coffee cup down on the edge of his desk with more precision than the gesture required. "My father is dead," she said. "I know," Alexander said. "I knew him." That pulled at something deep in her chest that she did not allow to show on her face. "A lot of people knew my father," she said. "I knew him specifically," Alexander said. "We had an arrangement before he died." She looked at him steadily. "What kind of arrangement?" He held her gaze. "The kind where he asked me to make sure you were safe," he said, and I agreed. The silence that followed was not like other silences. It was the specific kind that opens up when something you have believed to be solid turns out to have been built on ground that was moving. "You've been—" She stopped. "Watching over you," he said, "from a distance, for 7 years. My apartment," she said. "The landlord was approached about certain security improvements shortly after you moved in. The superintendent receives a monthly arrangement to make sure the building maintains standards. My job," she said. "St. Bartholomew's receives a donation annually from a foundation you've never heard of," he said, "which contributes to staffing stability in the emergency unit. The restaurant," she said. "The licensing issues that came up 2 years ago resolved faster than they should have." She stood up. She did not do it dramatically. She stood because the alternative was sitting still while the floor moved under her, and she had learned very young that when the ground shifts, you stand. "You've been managing my life," she said. "I've been making sure nothing disrupted it," he said. "That's different." "Is it?" "Emily." He said her name in a way that was not soft, but was honest, and she didn't know why that landed harder than softness would have. "Your father knew that what happened to him could reach you eventually. He didn't want that. He asked me to prevent it. I kept that agreement." "Without telling me?" "If I had told you, you would have—" "I would have walked away from everything," she said. "Yes, I would have, because I didn't ask to be watched over. I built a life specifically so I wouldn't need to be." "I know," he said. I'm not a... She stopped, breathed. I am not a protected asset. I am not something to be managed. No, he said. You're not. Yesterday proved that fairly definitively. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the same steady, calculating attention that had unnerved her the day before, and was doing something different now, something she had less vocabulary for, and she thought about the fact that this man had been somewhere in the background of her life for 7 years without her knowing, and found she could not entirely locate her feelings about that with any precision. I want to know what he asked you, she said. Exactly. What my father said to you. He was quiet for a moment. He said you would be fine, Alexander said. He said that 9 times out of 10 you would be more than fine. You were the most capable person he had ever raised, and he knew it. But he said there would be a 10th time, and when the 10th time came, he wanted to know someone who understood this world was paying attention. She felt something in her throat that she was not going to allow to become anything. He said that, she managed. Word for word, Alexander said. I wrote it down. She looked at the window, at the gray city behind it. Yesterday was the 10th time, she said. Yesterday was the 10th time, he said. She was quiet for a long moment. The person who hired that shooter, she said finally. You already have a theory. I have more than a theory. Someone inside your organization. Someone very close to it, yes. That means whoever they are, they're going to come back, she said. Because the shot failed, and when they come back, they're going to know that something changed yesterday. They're going to know about me, and they're going to want to know who I am and why I was there. That is correct, Alexander said. Which means your father's protection isn't sufficient anymore, she said, referring to the one she'd lived under unknowingly. Because now I'm visible. Yes. She turned back to him. So what are you proposing? She said. He met her eyes. I don't propose things, he said. But if I did, I would say that what happened yesterday created a situation. And the most efficient way to manage a situation is with the best available information and the most capable available people. She studied him. You want my help, she said. I want to understand what you know and what you can see, he said. And I want you somewhere I can ensure your safety while we figure out who is behind this. While you figure out, she said, or while we figure out. He looked at her for a moment. That, he said carefully, depends on what you decide to tell me about Daniel Russo's daughter. She looked at him for a long time. Outside the city moved in its vast, indifferent way. 41 floors below, people were walking to coffee shops and hospitals and restaurants that had been their fathers before they were theirs, carrying on the ordinary business of lives that had never been touched by rooms like this one. She thought about 9 years of careful construction, the name, the schedule, the small, manageable problems she had permitted herself. She thought about the coffee going cold on table 4 yesterday afternoon. She thought about the sound of a window rolling back up across a street and the shooter who would now know her face. She sat back down. My father, she said, started teaching me to read sightlines when I was 9 years old. He said it was a game. He said we were playing a game where you noticed the one thing in a room that didn't fit. For 3 years, I thought it was just something we did together, something interesting the way other fathers taught their kids chess or baseball. When I was 12, I realized it wasn't a game. Alexander was very still. He never trained me to fight, she said. He never taught me anything that could be used as a weapon, but he spent my entire childhood teaching me to see, to notice, to read the room before the room read me. She paused. I went into nursing because I wanted to use that skill to save people, rather than in the way he used it. But the skill itself, the noticing, I've never been able to turn it off. What do you see right now? Alexander said. She looked at him. I see a man, she said, who has been managing this world alone for a very long time, and who had something happen to him yesterday that he doesn't fully understand yet, and who is very good at looking like he has a plan, even when the plan is still being constructed. He was quiet. Also, she said, whoever is behind this knew your exact table at Martino's and the time of your reservation. That information came from someone who either works there or received it from someone who does. I would start there." He looked at her for a long, still moment. "Your father," he said finally, "was absolutely right about you." She picked up her coffee. "He usually was," she said. "That was the most annoying thing about him. And despite everything, the shooter, the revelation, the 7 years of invisible management, the situation she had walked into without knowing what she was walking into, Alexander Moretti did something she did not expect. He almost smiled. It was the smallest possible version of a smile. A fraction. A ghost. But it was there, and she noted it with the same careful attention she gave to everything else, filed it in the part of her mind that cataloged details she didn't know yet what to do with, and said nothing. The morning was only beginning, and whatever she had walked into yesterday by crossing the street, she understood now with the particular clarity that comes when you stop lying to yourself she had not walked out of. She had walked deeper in. She left his office at 11:17 in the morning with more information than she had arrived with and fewer certainties than she had possessed the day before, which was saying something, because yesterday she had walked into a room full of armed men on a 20-second decision and kissed a stranger in front of his entire criminal organization. That had felt at the time like the most uncertain she had ever been. She was revising that assessment now. The car took her back to the restaurant. She sat in the back seat and looked at her hands the way she sometimes did after a long shift at the hospital, checking for steadiness, making sure the outer surface matched the inner intention. Her hands were steady. They always were. Her father had said that too. He had said she had the hands of someone who had decided somewhere very early that the body was not allowed to tell the truth when the mind needed to hold something back. She had never decided to be that way. It had simply happened. Rosa was behind the counter when Emily came in, and Rosa took one look at her and said nothing, which was the particular genius of Rosa. She had worked in this restaurant for 11 years. First for Daniel Russo, and then for his daughter. And she had developed over that time an exquisite sensitivity to which moments required conversation and which required coffee. She put a cup in front of Emily. Emily sat at the counter and drank it. She thought about what Alexander had said. "Your father asked me to make sure you were safe. 7 years." He had been somewhere in the edges of her life for 7 years, and she had built herself so carefully inside that invisible perimeter, so convinced she was alone and self-sufficient and free, and the whole time, she stopped that thought. What was done was done. Her father had made choices she wasn't consulted about. Alexander Moretti had honored those choices. The result was that she had lived for 9 years in relative peace, and the peace had been partly constructed, and she could be angry about that, or she could look at what was in front of her now. What was in front of her now was a shooter who had failed and who knew her face. She finished the coffee. "I need to make some calls," she told Rosa. "Can you manage the lunch rush?" "I've been managing the lunch rush since before you were born," Rosa said, which was both accurate and a slight exaggeration. Emily went upstairs to her apartment. She sat at her kitchen table with a notepad and thought. The shooter was professional. That meant hired. That meant there was someone between the shooter and whoever gave the order, a chain of insulation designed to protect the person at the top. Breaking through that chain took time, resources, and access Emily didn't have. What she had was different. She had a skill her father had spent 12 years building in her, the ability to read context, to notice inconsistency, to see the detail that didn't fit the pattern. And she had something Alexander needed and hadn't fully said, so she was unknown. Nobody in his world knew who she was yet. Nobody outside his inner circle knew what had happened at Martino's or why. That window would close. She had maybe 2 days before it did. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Same number as last night. She answered. "Donovan." A pause. "How did you know it was me?" Different cadence on the ring pattern. "Also, you're the one managing communications on this." She had noticed that in the office, the way Donovan handled everything external, the way Alexander's personal phone stayed in his jacket pocket the entire time. Division of labor that told you something about the structure. "What is it?" Mr. Moretti would like you to come back this afternoon, Donovan said. There have been developments. What kind of developments? The kind he'd prefer to explain in person. She looked at the notepad. 3 o'clock. 2:30 if possible. 3, she said. I have to tell Rosa where I'll be. She could feel him deciding whether to push on that. 3 o'clock, he said. She hung up. She looked at the notepad for another moment. Then she wrote one word in the center of it. Martino's. She circled it. Someone had given the shooter Alexander's table and time. That information came from inside the restaurant or directly from Alexander's schedule. His schedule would be controlled very few people with access high security awareness. But a restaurant reservation was different. Restaurants talk to each other to suppliers to the city in small ordinary ways. A reservation at a place like Martino's went through a particular channel. Someone in that channel had passed the information along. She underlined the word. Then she got up, put on her coat, and went to ask the right questions. Martino's back entrance opened onto a service alley. Emily knew this because she had been walking this neighborhood for 9 years and had absorbed its layout the way her father had taught her to, not by studying it, but by moving through it with attention, the way water finds every crack and stone without trying. She didn't go to the back entrance. She went to the restaurant across the alley from it, a Thai place called Siam Garden that had been there for 20 years and whose owner, Mr. Prayat, was 71 years old, deeply observant, and had an unbroken habit of sitting by his own back window every afternoon between 2 and 4 to drink tea and read the newspaper. She knocked on Siam Garden's back door. Mr. Prayat opened it. He looked at her unsurprised. Emily, he said. I haven't seen you since the summer. I've been busy, she said. Can I come in? He stepped back. She sat across from him at his small staff table and accepted the tea he poured without being asked, and they talked about small things for a few minutes. The weather, the neighborhood, the Thai restaurant 3 blocks north that had just opened and was drawing foot traffic. And then she said, Did you see anything unusual in the alley yesterday, between noon and 2? Mr. Prayat was quiet for a moment. There was a man, he said. Delivery uniform, but the truck was wrong. She kept her face neutral. Wrong how? Regular delivery trucks for this block, I know them. Brown uniform, same logo, been coming for 8 years. He tapped the table. Yesterday's man had the right uniform, but the truck didn't have the logo on the passenger side panel, only on the driver's side. And the truck was too clean for a truck that age. She felt the familiar quiet click of a detail falling into place. What time? 12:15. Maybe 12:20. Did he make a delivery? He went to Martino's back entrance. He was there maybe 4 minutes. Then he left. Did he go inside? The door opened from inside, Mr. Prayat said. Someone let him in. He wasn't there long enough to actually move anything. She thought about that. Thank you, she said. Is this about what happened yesterday across the street? He said. She looked at him. I don't know what happened across the street, he said serenely. I just know that afterward there were a lot of serious-looking cars on this block, and this morning there were more, and you're here asking questions. He refilled her tea. Your father used to do the same thing, you know. Ask questions quietly in the right places, before the loud things happened. She looked at her tea. He did, she said. Yes, you have his eyes, Mr. Prayat said. Not the color, the quality. She left 10 minutes later with 2 things: the confirmation that someone at Martino's had received a visitor they weren't supposed to have, and the very particular ache that came from being compared to her father in ways she couldn't argue with. She arrived at Alexander's building at 3 o'clock exactly. Donovan met her in the lobby and walked her to a different floor than that morning, lower, more secure, no windows. A conference room with a long table and 4 people already seated around it whom she didn't know. She catalogued them in the time it took to cross the room. Man late 50s, the posture of someone who had held institutional authority for a long time. Man 30s, attentive in the way of a person whose job was to remember everything. Woman 40s, the particular stillness of someone with legal training. Man. And here she paused internally for just a half second. Mid-50s expensive suit, easy smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of face that had been handsome enough long enough that it had learned to use that as a tool. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't need to. She already didn't trust him. Alexander was standing at the far end of the table. He looked at her when she came in, and something brief and unnameable passed across his face. "Miss Carter," he said. "Thank you for coming back." "Of course," she said. She sat in the empty chair without being directed to one choosing the seat that put her back to the wall, and gave her a clear line to the door. The man with the easy smile noticed that. She noticed him notice. "We've identified the shooter," Alexander said without preamble. He remained standing. "He was found this morning in the Hudson. Someone cleaned up their own work." The room absorbed this. "So whoever hired him is thorough," Emily said. "And frightened," the 30s man said. "You don't move that fast on cleanup unless you're worried about exposure." "Or confident," she said. "Confident enough to believe that removing the shooter protects them completely, which means they think the chain breaks there. They don't know the reservation channel was compromised." The woman with legal training looked up sharply. "What reservation channel?" Emily told them about Mr. Prayat, the delivery man, the 4 minutes at Martino's back entrance. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Alexander was looking at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize the concentrated, slightly narrowed quality of someone recalibrating their understanding of a variable. "You went and got that this morning," he said. "I had time between your office and 3 o'clock. On your own?" "I know the neighborhood," she said. The man with the easy smile leaned forward. "Miss Carter, I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Victor Valenti." He extended his hand across the table. "Alexander and I have known each other since we were boys. I'm something like family." She shook his hand. His grip was warm and confident and slightly too long. "Emily Carter," she said. "Yes, we've heard quite a bit about you in the last 18 hours, Victor said. "The woman who walked into Martino's and kissed our Alexander." He smiled. "Quite the entrance." "It worked," she said. "It did," he said. "Though some of us are still curious about a woman from a neighborhood restaurant who knows how to read a shooter's position." He paused, the way people pause when they want the pause to feel casual. "Care to say more about that?" She looked at him. "Not particularly." Something crossed his face that was not quite humor. "Victor," Alexander said. His voice was even and not loud, and it carried the specific weight of a man ending a line of inquiry. Victor sat back with the easy smile re-established and said nothing. Emily filed that exchange in the same place she'd put everything else. "The person at Martino's who let the delivery man in," she said. "Have you identified them?" The late 50s man spoke for the first time. His name was Caruso. She would learn the organization's chief operational manager. "We're working on it." 3 kitchen staff and 1 floor manager had access to that door in that window. "The floor manager," she said. "Why him?" Caruso asked. "Because a kitchen staff member would need a reason to let in an unscheduled delivery. It would be noticed by other kitchen staff. A floor manager has the authority to conduct business at that door without explanation." Caruso looked at Alexander. Alexander looked at Emily. "Talk to the floor manager first," he said to Caruso. "I'll want to be there," Emily said. The room went very still. Caruso looked at her the way someone looks at an unfamiliar object that has just spoken. "She stays," Alexander said. That simply, that finally. Caruso left the room. The woman with legal training followed. The 30s man stayed laptop open. Victor remained. He was watching Emily with the pleasant, thoughtful attention of a man doing arithmetic he doesn't want anyone to know he's doing. "You're Daniel Russo's daughter," he said. Not a question. She looked at him. "I heard Alexander mention it this morning." Victor said to Alexander, "I didn't realize she was... I knew Daniel, of course. Excellent man. Terrible loss is what happened to him." He turned back to Emily. "He must have been an exceptional teacher." "He was my father," she said. "Not my teacher." Of course, Victor said. Of course, I only meant... He let it trail, the easy smile. Apologies. Grief is a complicated thing. She looked at her hands flat on the table and then looked back at him. It is, she agreed pleasantly. He excused himself 10 minutes later. She watched him go. When the door closed, the 30s man, his name was Ellis, didn't look up from his laptop, but he said quietly, "You don't like him." "I don't know him," she said. "Same thing you said to Donovan this morning," Ellis said, still not looking up. "When he asked you the same question a different way." She looked at him. He was younger than she'd initially assessed. Maybe 28, same as her. Smart in the specific way of someone who processed information faster than other people and had learned not to show it. "You were listening this morning," she said. "Mr. Moretti likes a second set of ears." "Noted," she said. Alexander had been standing at the window, his default position. She was beginning to understand the place he went when he was processing, and now he turned. "What do you think of Victor?" he said. She looked at him. "You're asking me to tell you something about a man you've known for 30 years based on 20 minutes in a conference room." "I'm asking you what you noticed," he said. "You notice things." She thought about this. "His grief for my father was performed," she said. "Not necessarily because he didn't feel anything. Performed grief and real grief can coexist. But the performance was for me, not for himself. He wanted me to see it." She paused. "He also wanted to know how much I knew about my father's world. The question about teaching that was calibrated. He was measuring my access." Alexander said nothing. "He smiled when he found out I existed," she said. "Most people in that room registered me as an unknown variable, something to be assessed. He registered me as something else." "What?" She met Alexander's eyes across the room. "An opportunity," she said. "Or a problem. I couldn't tell which." Alexander was quiet for a long time. "Victor has been with me since I was 11 years old," he said. "His sister was married to my cousin Marcus. When Marcus died, Victor stayed. He has been in every major decision this organization has made for the last 20 years. "That's not what I asked," she said. "I didn't ask you a question," he said. "I was telling you something." She understood. He was telling her the weight of what she was saying. He was telling her what the cost of being wrong would be. He was telling her in the particular oblique way of a man who did not make declarations that this was not a small thing she had named. "I know," she said quietly. He turned back to the window. The silence stretched out between them, and she let it because she had learned that the silences with Alexander Moretti carried their own information. "He was the one who booked my table at Martino's," Alexander said finally. "He always handles that, has for years." She felt the cold move through her the way it had the day before watching the car window crack open across the street. She said nothing. She waited. "He called ahead yesterday morning to confirm the reservation," Alexander said. "He said Martino's had reached out to him to verify the time." "Did they?" "I had Donovan check." He paused. "No. Martino's has a standing arrangement. There was no reason to call." The room was very quiet. "He's the only person outside Martino's staff who had the confirmed table and time," Alexander said. She kept her breathing even and her hands flat on the table. "You've been thinking this since this morning," she said. "Since last night. And you brought him into the room with me today anyway. I wanted to see what you saw." She looked at him. "That was a risk." "I assessed it as manageable." "You were wrong," she said. "He knows I can read people. He knows I'm Daniel Russo's daughter. Whatever advantage you gained by watching him watch me, he gained something too. He knows I'm here. He knows I matter to this investigation. If he's behind this, he now has reason to consider me a direct threat." Alexander looked at her. "You're right," he said. She almost said something sharp about the inadequacy of that admission, and then she didn't, because she could see that it was sincere, and she had developed a provisional policy in the last 18 hours of not wasting ammunition on sincerity. "What do you need from me now?" she said. He turned fully away from the window. I need to know what you know about your father's connection to Victor Valenti, he said. She thought about this carefully. My father never mentioned him by name, she said. But there was someone I heard conversations I wasn't supposed to hear when I was a child. There was a man my father called the Smiling One. He said him the way you say something that you want to keep small, something that's going to become a problem and you're hoping won't. She paused. He said once when he thought I was asleep, the smiling ones are always the most dangerous because they need you to like them. A man who needs you to like him will do anything if he thinks you've stopped. Alexander absorbed this. That could describe anyone, he said. It could, she said. But I watched Victor Valenti for 20 minutes, and every single thing he did in that room was about monitoring whether he was well liked. Every pause, every smile, every apology. He's very good at it. Most people wouldn't notice. Most people haven't spent their lives learning to notice, Alexander said. No, she agreed. The door opened. Caruso came back. He looked at Alexander, and something in his face told her the floor manager conversation had gone the way she expected. He received an envelope 2 weeks ago, Caruso said. Cash. Significant amount. He says he didn't know what it was for. He says the delivery man showed up, asked him to confirm the details of a reservation at a specific time, gave him the envelope, and left. And he took the money, Alexander said. And he took the money. 2 weeks ago, Emily said. Caruso looked at her. Yes. So this wasn't reactive, she said. This wasn't planned around Alexander's schedule once it was set. The reservation was used, but the plan started 2 weeks ago, which means this was in motion before the table was booked. Martino's was chosen. The time was chosen. The information was acquired to confirm a choice that had already been made. She looked at Alexander. Whoever did this chose Martino's specifically, she said. Not because you were going to be there, they arranged for you to be there, which means the reservation itself was suggested by someone who knew you would accept it. The room went very still. Victor called me on Monday, Alexander said slowly. He said Martino's had reached out about hosting a working dinner for the organization. He said it would be good for relations with the restaurant's ownership. And you agreed, she said. I agreed. So, the location, the time, the arrangement all came from Victor. Alexander didn't answer that, because it wasn't a question. Emily looked at the table. She thought about the smiling one. She thought about her father's voice in the dark, saying certain things he believed she couldn't hear. She thought about the particular grief of discovering that danger comes most efficiently from the direction of trust. He doesn't know you know, she said. He thinks the shooter's death closed the chain. He thinks the floor manager didn't talk. The floor manager is going to be persuaded not to discuss this further, Caruso said. Good, Emily said. Then Victor is comfortable right now. He thinks it failed, and there are no threads. He'll plan again. Not immediately, he'll want distance, but he'll plan again. Which means we have a window, Alexander said. A small one, she said. And you can't move against him without certainty. He's too embedded, too known. If you move on Victor Valenti without absolute proof, the organization fractures. I know that. So the question, she said, is how you get the proof. She looked up at him. He was looking at her in the way he had at Martino's, the way that had no name she could put to it, and she understood that he was about to say something that was going to change the shape of this situation again. Victor doesn't know who you are, he said. Not really. He knows your name. He knows you're Daniel Russo's daughter. He knows you saved my life. But he doesn't know your capabilities. He doesn't know what your father taught you. He paused. And he is very interested in you. I noticed, she said. He'll try to make contact, Alexander said, separately from me. He'll come to you on his own in a setting he controls, and he'll seem warm and friendly and interested in protecting you. And you want me to let him, she said. The room was waiting. She thought about 9 years. She thought about the restaurant and the hospital and the small, manageable problems she had permitted herself. She thought about her father's voice. The smiling ones are always the most dangerous. She thought about the fact that she had crossed the street yesterday on 20 seconds of instinct, and that the instinct had been right, and that the life she had built to avoid this world had delivered her directly into the center of it regardless. "He'll test me," she said. "He'll ask questions I'm not supposed to answer easily. He'll watch how I move and how I talk, and he'll be trying to decide if I'm a threat or an asset." "Yes," Alexander said. "And you want me to be an asset," she said. "To him." "I want you to let him think you are," Alexander said, "until we know what we need to know." She looked at him for a long time. "That's dangerous," she said. "Yes. If he finds out who you are to me, what you've already told me, he won't hesitate." "No," Alexander said, "he won't." "So you're asking me to walk directly toward the person who most likely just tried to have you killed, smile at him, and gather information?" "I'm asking," he said carefully, "if you're willing to do that." "I'm not telling you. I'm asking." She registered the distinction. She registered that he had made it deliberately. She thought about her father again, about the conversations in the dark, about the particular face her father had made when he looked at her, that mix of fierce pride and something very close to apology, as if he knew what he'd built in her, and was sorry she'd needed it, and proud she had it, and uncertain those two things could coexist. She thought about the fact that the shooter was dead at the bottom of the Hudson, and that Victor Valenti was having dinner somewhere tonight, comfortable and warm, and certain he was safe. "I'll need to know everything you know about him," she said. "His habits, his routines, his people. I need to know who he trusts, who he avoids, what he's afraid of losing." Alexander nodded. "And I need something in return," she said. He waited. "I need you to be honest with me," she said. "Not managed, not protected. If you know something that affects what I'm walking into, I need to know it first, not after, not when it becomes convenient." She looked at him steadily. "I've been living inside a protection arrangement I didn't consent to for 7 years. If I'm doing this, I do it with full information, or I don't do it at all." The room was very quiet. Donovan was in the doorway. He had come in at some point during the conversation, and she hadn't noticed, which told her she had been less focused than usual, which told her something about what this conversation was doing to her concentration. "Full information," Alexander said. "Yes." "Then yes," she said. "I'll do it." She gathered her coat. "He'll probably reach out within 48 hours, she said. "He'll use a mutual connection or present it as coincidence. Don't warn me when it's coming. I need to react naturally." "Understood," Alexander said. She was at the door when he said her name. Not Carter, the other one. "Emily." Quietly. She turned. "Your father," he said. "The last time I saw him, the last conversation we had, he told me the one thing he regretted was that he couldn't tell you himself how extraordinary you were." He paused. He didn't want to say it because he was afraid it would make you feel like you owed something to that world. He didn't want you to feel like your abilities meant you had a debt. A long beat. He just wanted you to know. She stood very still. "Thank you," she said after a moment. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. She left before he could see anything else. In the elevator going down, she put her back against the wall and closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. Then she straightened. Then she thought about Victor Valenti's easy smile, and her father's voice in the dark, and the fact that she had 9 years of quiet life behind her, and an indeterminate amount of something else in front of her, and she started building the thing she would need to be when he came to find her. She was good at building things. She had been doing it her entire life. The question now was whether the latest version she constructed would hold under the particular pressure of a man who had spent decades making everyone around him believe they were safe. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, not Donovan's cadence. She let it ring twice more. Then she answered. "Miss Carter," said a warm, familiar voice. "This is Victor Valenti. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was hoping we might have coffee tomorrow, just the two of us. I knew your father and I feel I owe it to his memory to make sure you're being properly looked after during all of this." She had been wrong about 48 hours. He hadn't waited a day. She let a small pause sit in the line, the kind that sounds like pleasant surprise. "Mr. Valenti," she said. "Of course, I'd like that very much." And the game began. She picked the coffee place. That was the first move, and Victor accepted it without comment, which told her he was smart enough not to push on small things. Small concessions cost nothing and bought goodwill. She had chosen a coffee shop on West 22nd. Not her neighborhood, not his neutral ground. A place busy enough that a conversation could be private by virtue of being surrounded by noise. She arrived 8 minutes early and took the corner table that faced the door. She ordered black coffee and waited. He came in at exactly the agreed time, which told her he was also the kind of person who used punctuality as a tool. On time meant reliable. On time meant I respect you. On time meant absolutely nothing about what was actually happening inside the man wearing the nice coat and the warm smile who was crossing the room toward her with his hand already extended. "Emily," he said, like they were old friends, like the name belonged to him. "Mr. Valenti," she said, and shook his hand. "Victor, please." He sat. "You found a good spot. I've never been here." "I like the coffee," she said, "and the noise. I'm not much for quiet places." He smiled. "Neither am I. You can learn a lot about a person from the kind of quiet they can tolerate." He ordered an Americano. He settled back in his chair with the ease of a man who had conducted 1,000 conversations exactly like this one in 1,000 different rooms and had never once been on the losing side. "I want to say first," he said, "that what you did at Martino's was remarkable. I've been in this world a long time, Emily. A long time. And I have never seen anything like it. The courage that takes the speed of thinking, it's extraordinary." "It was instinct," she said. "The best things always are." He tilted his head. "Your father had that too. That quality. Daniel could read a room before he walked into it. I used to watch him at meetings and think this man is 3 moves ahead of everyone else at the table, and he doesn't even look like he's trying." He paused. "It's remarkable to see it in you. He would have been so proud." She let her face do something soft. Not too much, just enough. "Did you know him well?" she said. "As well as anyone could know Daniel Russo," Victor said. "He was not a man who let people fully in. I respected that about him. In this world, the men who keep their inner lives private tend to survive longer." He looked at his coffee. "He talked about you, though, that he couldn't help." "What did he say?" "That you were the one good thing he'd done right," Victor said. "That you had your mother's heart and his eyes, and that he hoped you'd never have to use his eyes the way he'd had to. It was very well done." She noted that clearly the specific detail, the right emotional register, the careful phrasing that gestured at something painful, without crossing into manipulation, so obvious it would land wrong. He was very, very good. The problem was that her father had never spoken that way about her eyes specifically. He had said she had his hands. That was what he always said. His hands, not his eyes. Victor had been close enough to Daniel Russo to know something, but not close enough to know the specific language her father used for her, which meant his intelligence was second-hand, which meant he had sources, but not intimacy. She filed this with everything else, and let her expression stay warm. "He used to say things like that," she said, "when he was tired." "Tired men tell the truth," Victor said. "It's one of the reliable constants." They talked for 20 minutes about her father. She gave him things that were true, carefully selected stories that felt like intimacy, but revealed nothing operational. She watched him receive them, watched him catalog and assess. He was measuring how much she knew, how connected she still was to that world, whether she was an asset or a threat or something in between. He was good at pretending he wasn't doing this. She was better at pretending she didn't notice. "I want to speak honestly with you," Victor said, arriving at what she knew was the reason for the coffee. About your situation right now. Please, she said. Alexander is a good man, Victor said, and he said it with exactly the tone of someone about to qualify a good man's goodness. I have enormous respect for him, but he has a way of drawing people into his orbit without fully considering the cost to them. I've watched it happen many times over the years. People who meant to have a small connection to his world end up consumed by it. He looked at her with what appeared to be sincere concern. What happened at Martino's, your involvement in this investigation? I worry about you. I worry you don't fully understand what you're walking into. What am I walking into? She said. A war, he said simply. Alexander has enemies, serious ones. People who have been waiting for years for the right moment. What happened with the shooter? That's the opening move, Emily. Not the whole game. And people who get close to Alexander during these moments. He stopped, shook his head. I've seen it before. They become targets. I'm already a target, she said. The shooter saw my face. Exactly, Victor said. Which is why I'm concerned. Which is why I wanted to reach out directly, not through Alexander's people, not through the machinery of his organization, just me as someone who knew your father saying to you, you have options. You don't have to be in the center of this. She looked at him. What options? She said. Let me help you, he said. I have resources that operate independently. I can arrange for you to be somewhere safe, not hidden, not disappeared, just removed from the immediate situation while this resolves itself. You'd be protected, comfortable, free to live your life. And in exchange, she said. He smiled. No exchange. This would be something I'm doing for Daniel's daughter. Out of respect. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, That's very generous. I mean it sincerely, he said. Can I think about it? She said. Of course. Take all the time you need. He took out a card. No organization, no title, just a number, and slid it across the table. Call me directly, day or night. She took the card. Victor, she said as they were standing to leave. What do you think happened at Martino's? Who do you think is behind it? He looked at her with an expression of measured gravity. I don't want to speculate, he said. These things are always more complicated than they look from the outside. But I will say... He paused. Alexander has made decisions over the years that have created resentments. Old ones, the kind that sit and ferment. He put on his coat. I just hope he finds the answer before the next attempt. He said it perfectly. The next attempt. Not another attempt. The next one. As if its existence were already a certainty. She kept her face exactly as it was. Me too, she said. Thank you for the coffee, Victor. She left first. She walked 2 blocks before she pulled out her phone. She called Donovan. He offered to relocate me, she said when he answered. Independent resources. No connection to Alexander. He said it was for my protection. A short pause. We heard. She stopped walking. You had coverage on the meet. 2 people in the room. She thought about the 20 minutes she'd spent watching Victor watch her and wondering whether she had been thorough enough. She thought about the conversations she'd had and what she'd revealed and what she hadn't. Were they any good? She said. Excuse me, your coverage. Were they any good? They're among the best. There was a woman in a yellow scarf by the window who spent 40 minutes nursing an oat milk latte and kept her phone face down on the table, but angled toward us, she said. And a man at the counter who rotated his stool 11 degrees to the right approximately 4 minutes after we sat down. Which is fine, that's textbook positioning, but he should have ordered food. Nobody sits at a coffee counter for 40 minutes with only a drink if they're actually waiting for someone. A long pause. I'll pass that along, Donovan said. Tell them they were good enough for a standard surveillance situation, she said. Victor is not a standard surveillance situation. He notices things. I don't know if he made them or not. Did you make them? I was looking. He might not have been. Might, Donovan said. Yes, she said. Might, which is the problem. She started walking again. He said, the next attempt, she said. Not another one. The next one. He's already planning. He's not in a reactive posture. He's on a timeline, and he's frustrated that Martino's failed. Alexander needs to hear this directly, Donovan said. I know. Tonight. She hung up. She walked the rest of the way to the restaurant. She went in through the back, said hello to Rosa, checked the lunch numbers, spent 40 minutes doing the ordinary work of running a place her father had loved, and tried to remember who she was underneath the version of herself she was currently building. It was harder than it should have been. At 7 o'clock, the car came. Alexander's office was different at night. The city behind the window became abstract lights, without source movement, without context. He was at the desk this time, actually behind it, which meant something about the formality of what was about to happen. Donovan and Ellis were there. Caruso was on the phone in the corner. The woman with legal training, her name was Margaret Chen. Emily had learned, and she was both Alexander's attorney and his most trusted advisor. On organizational matters, sat with a legal pad that she actually wrote on. Emily sat across from Alexander. She walked them through the coffee meeting in sequence, including everything Victor had said, the specific language, the card, the offer of relocation. She gave them the phrasing of the next attempt, last, and watched what it did to the room. Caruso ended his phone call. Margaret Chen stopped writing. Donovan made a sound that was not quite a word. Alexander sat very still. He's not worried, Emily said. That's the thing that should frighten you. A man who just failed an assassination attempt on someone he's known for 30 years should be showing some internal pressure, some sign of recalibration. He was completely comfortable. He came to that coffee meeting with the ease of someone who is right on schedule. He's already moved to Phase 2, Ellis said. Or Phase 2 was always running parallel to Phase 1, Emily said. The shooter was one vector. Getting me out of Alexander's orbit is another. Whatever comes next is a third. He's not improvising, he's executing a plan. Why get you out? Margaret said. Why does he care? Because I'm unpredictable to him, Emily said. He came to the meeting to assess me, and I don't think he left with a clean read, which means I'm a variable he hasn't fully categorized. Uncategorized variables make people like him nervous. People like him, Alexander said. It wasn't quite a question. People who run plans, she said. People who need the board set a specific way. An unexpected piece moves in a direction you don't control, and the plan has to adjust. He doesn't know how to adjust for me yet, so he tried to remove me. She paused. I want to use that. How? Caruso said. I want to call him back, she said. I want to tell him I've thought about his offer and I'm interested. I want to ask him for a second meeting. The room was very quiet. If I go back to him agreeable, she said, he relaxes. I become a solved problem. And a man running a plan on a timeline with a solved problem in front of him talks. Not everything, not obviously, but he talks. He signals. He can't help it. People who are confident in their plans want the people around them to understand at some level how clever they've been. That's an enormous risk, Donovan said. I know. He's not a safe man to be alone with, Donovan said. If he decides at any point that you're a threat rather than an asset. I know, she said again. Emily. Alexander's voice was quiet. She looked at him. This is different from what I asked before. This is putting you inside his confidence. If something goes wrong, we may not be able to reach you in time. I understand the risk. I want to make sure you do, he said. Specifically, not abstractly. She looked at him. She thought about the man at the bottom of the Hudson, who had once been a professional shooter with a timeline and a position and a plan. She thought about how quickly Victor had moved from that failure to the coffee meeting less than 24 hours, as if the setback had been budgeted into the schedule. He's going to try again, she said. Whatever his plan is, it has a time component, something that needs to happen by a certain point. He moved too fast on the coffee meeting that's urgency dressed up as concern. If we wait, if we try to build the case from outside, we'll be finding evidence of an event that's already happened. She held Alexander's gaze. I'm not doing this because I'm not afraid. I'm doing it because the alternative is watching and hoping we're fast enough. The room was still. What do you need? Alexander said. Two things, she said. First, everything you have on Victor. Not organizational history, not loyalty assessments. Personal. His finances, his relationships, anyone he's made promises to in the last 5 years. Whatever you find when you look at a man and ask who does he owe. And second, Alexander said, I want to know what he wants, she said. Not power in general, specifically. What specific thing does Victor Valenti believe he deserves that he doesn't have? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. His brother-in-law Marcus left the organization to me, Alexander said. Not to Victor. Victor was Marcus's closest advisor for 15 years. When Marcus died, the natural expectation in Victor's mind was that it would go to him. But Marcus chose you, she said. Marcus chose me, and Victor accepted that. Victor appeared to accept that, Alexander said, for 9 years. What changed 9 years ago? She said. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. This one had weight in it, something no one in the room wanted to be the one to say. Margaret Chen was the one who said it. You got engaged, she said quietly. 9 years ago. To a woman named Claire. Emily looked at her. Then at Alexander. Something moved across his face that she had not seen before. Not the controlled assessment, not the strategic stillness, but something older and rawer that he shut down almost before it registered. She died, he said, flat, final. I'm sorry, Emily said. He didn't respond to that. Victor was very close to Claire, Margaret said carefully. Closer than Alexander knew at the time. There was a question after she died about certain decisions that had been made. Medical decisions in the final period. Victor was involved in her care. He had power of attorney in one specific matter during a period when Alexander was... She stopped. I was unavailable, Alexander said. His voice was even and offered nothing. Victor made a decision, Margaret said. A medical decision on Claire's behalf. Alexander has always believed it was the wrong decision. Was it? Emily said. We don't know, Margaret said. We have never been able to know. That's the answer that has lived with Alexander for 9 years. She looked at Alexander. He was looking at his desk. Victor knows I suspect him, Alexander said. I've never said it. I've never moved against him. I kept him in the organization because I had no proof, and because he had been with me since we were boys, and because some part of me needed to believe I was wrong. He paused. And because keeping him close meant keeping him visible. But now he's moved first, Emily said. Now he's moved first, Alexander said. He doesn't want power, she said. Or not only power, he wants to not be suspected. He wants to not spend the rest of his life inside the gaze of a man who has never fully forgiven him. She paused. He wants to erase the question. And I'm the question, Alexander said. You're the question, she said. And I'm the new variable he didn't plan for. She stood. I'm going to call him tomorrow morning, she said. Tell him I've decided he's right. Tell him I want to take him up on the offer, but I need a few days to arrange things. I can't disappear suddenly. It will look strange to Alexander. I'll tell him I need to stay close to Alexander for a few more days to avoid suspicion. Which keeps you in play with both of us, Ellis said. Which keeps me in play with both of you, she confirmed, and which gives Victor a reason to share more of his timeline with me, because he'll want me out before the next phase executes. You'll be carrying information in both directions, Donovan said. If he tests you, if he asks you to prove something, then I'll need to know in advance what I can give him, she said. Real information, small enough not to damage, but real enough to be convincing. I'll need Alexander to authorize what I can offer. She looked at Alexander. Decide tonight, she said. What you're willing to give. I'll call Victor in the morning, and I'll need to know before I do. She was at the door when he said Emily. She turned. The woman in the yellow scarf, he said. Was she actually ours? She looked at him. Yes, she said. She just needed to order food. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile and was not quite something else. I'll tell her, he said. She left. She walked home because she needed the cold air and the movement needed the city around her, the way she sometimes needed the noise of the restaurant when something in her head was too loud to manage in silence. Victor Valenti had killed Claire. Maybe. The word was maybe, and it would be maybe until it wasn't, and the entire architecture of what she was building was predicated on reaching the point where maybe collapsed into certainty. She thought about Alexander saying I was unavailable with the specific flatness of a man compressing something enormous into 2 words. She thought about 9 years of keeping a man in his organization who he suspected of something unforgivable because he had no proof and needed the suspicion visible. She thought about what it cost to carry that. To sit across a conference table from the smiling face of the man who might have made the decision that killed the woman you were going to marry every day for 9 years and show nothing. She stopped at the corner of her block. She stood in the cold for a moment. She had spent 9 years building a life that asked nothing of anyone and expected nothing from anyone and was contained and manageable and hers. And now she was standing on a street corner at 10 o'clock at night, constructing a deception that would put her inside the confidence of a man who murdered people cleanly and waited years to settle his accounts. She was her father's daughter. She had always known it. She had just spent 9 years in a very elaborate argument with herself about what that meant. She went upstairs. She sat at the kitchen table with the card Victor had given her face up in front of her. Her phone buzzed. Alexander. She answered. The information you can offer him, he said without preamble. There's a meeting next week. Wednesday. Location we've been securing for a month. If I give you the location, it's real enough to be useful, but we can change it in the next 72 hours. It won't damage us. We'd be handing him something that looks significant but is actually hollow. He'll verify it, she said. He has people inside. If he checks and the meeting address doesn't match what I gave him, which is why the address will match, Alexander said, for as long as it takes him to check. Then we move the meeting. How long do you need? 48 hours from the moment you give him the address. That's tight, she said. Yes, he said. She thought about it. He'll want more than one piece of information, she said. The address will satisfy him initially, but he'll come back for something else. He'll want proof that I actually have access to you. What would prove that? Alexander said. She thought about the coffee meeting, the way Victor had watched her, what he wanted to believe about her. He wants me to be afraid of you, she said. He wants me to be a woman who got pulled into Alexander Moretti's orbit and realized she's in over her head and wants out. If I give him something that sounds like I overheard it accidentally, something personal rather than operational, it will read as authentic. What kind of personal? She paused. Claire, she said quietly. If I tell him I heard you talking about her, that I heard something that frightened me, he'll believe that because he knows that topic has emotional weight for you, and he'll believe I'm scared because that's the story he's already telling himself about me. The silence on the line had a particular texture. Alexander, she said, I don't have to use that. We can find another way. No, he said. It's the right move. You're correct. Another pause. What will you say you heard? That you were talking to someone about an old debt. That you said some debts are paid in full and some are paid in blood. That you didn't know I was in the hallway and when you saw me the conversation stopped. He'll know what that means, Alexander said. Yes, she said. He'll know you're still thinking about Claire, and he'll be afraid. And afraid men on timelines move faster than they should. Which is what we need, Alexander said. Which is what we need, she confirmed. The line was quiet for a moment. Get some sleep, he said. You too, she said, and then felt the slight oddness of saying that to Alexander Moretti, who did not seem like a man who was told to sleep by anyone. He didn't respond to it. He hung up. She put the phone down. She looked at Victor's card. She picked up her phone again. She called Donovan. "I need something from you," she said. "Not from Alexander. From you personally off the record." "Depends what it is," Donovan said. "Claire," she said, "I need to know everything that happened. The medical decision, the timeline, what Victor had power of attorney for, and why and how it was arranged. Everything that Alexander couldn't investigate himself because he was too close to it." A long pause. "That's sensitive information," Donovan said. "I know. I need it anyway. Not to use against Alexander. I need to understand what Victor is protecting. What secret he's been carrying long enough to decide it was worth killing for. Because whatever the full story is, it's the thing that's been driving this for 9 years, and if I'm going to be in a room alone with him trying to draw it out, I need to know what I'm drawing toward." Donovan was quiet for a long time. "I'll send you what I have," he said finally. "It isn't complete. Some of it you'll have to fill in." "That's fine," she said. "I'm good at filling things in." She hung up. She made tea she didn't drink. The documents from Donovan arrived 40 minutes later. She read them at the kitchen table with the kind of focused attention she gave to critical cases at the hospital. Clinical thorough, building a picture from evidence rather than assumption. What she found was worse than she had expected. Not more dramatic, not more violent, just worse in the specific way that quiet, deliberate betrayal is always worse than the kind that announces itself. Victor Valenti had held power of attorney over one specific decision: the choice of care facility when Claire's condition deteriorated past the point of home management. He had cited Alexander's operational unavailability, a 72-hour period, during which Alexander had been completely unreachable in the management of a crisis that required his full attention, as the reason he had needed to act. He had chosen a facility, a specific one. The facility had an excellent reputation. It also had, as a quiet secondary fact, a financial relationship with a holding company that was 2 removes from Victor Valenti's personal accounts. The money was not significant. That was the detail that made it so damning. If Victor had enriched himself substantially through the choice, it would have looked like greed, and greed was at least understandable. Instead, the arrangement suggested something more specific. The choice of facility had been about the facility itself, not the money. About what the facility would do or not do with the person inside it. Claire had died 11 weeks after entering the facility. The official cause was complications from her underlying condition. The attending physician had submitted a thorough and accurate report. There was nothing explicitly wrong with any of it. There was nothing explicitly wrong with any of it. Emily sat back. She thought about the word maybe. She thought about Alexander sitting in that office for 9 years with a man he suspected of a crime he couldn't prove, because the crime had been committed in the language of medical decisions and institutional paperwork, in the quiet grammar of forms and choices, and a 72-hour window when the man he loved was alone. She thought about Victor's easy smile. She thought about the way he had said your father talked about you, though that he couldn't help, and how the intimacy of it had been real enough to function and false enough to matter. She picked up her phone one more time. She texted Alexander one line. "I read Donovan's file. I understand what we're looking for now. I'll call Victor in the morning." She waited. 3 minutes passed. His reply was 2 words. "Thank you." She turned off the light. She lay in the dark and built the version of herself she would present to Victor Valenti. In the morning, a woman who was frightened, uncertain, beginning to realize that the world she'd walked into was bigger than she could manage alone, grateful for a warm and fatherly hand extended in her direction. She built it carefully. She built it well. And she made sure in the very center of it to leave a small invisible space that was only her, the part that watched and noticed and never under any circumstances turned off, so that when Victor Valenti smiled at her and believed she was solved, she would know exactly what she was looking at. Her father's voice in the dark. The smiling ones are always the most dangerous because they need you to like them. She understood it now in a way she hadn't fully understood it before. Her father hadn't been warning her about strangers. He had been warning her about Victor. She called Victor at 8:47 in the morning. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he had been waiting. Men who were confident didn't wait by their phones. Men who were managing a timeline did. "Emily," he said. Warm. Ready. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him. Her voice was slightly lower than usual, slightly careful. The voice of someone who had spent the night making a difficult decision. "I think you're right. About Alexander. About the situation." A pause. She let breathe just long enough. "I heard something yesterday, after our coffee. I was in the hallway outside his office, and I didn't realize he was still inside, and he was on the phone, and I heard—" She stopped. "What did you hear?" Victor said. Quiet, intent. "He said some debts are paid in full, and some are paid in blood." She let that sit. "And when he saw me in the doorway, the conversation stopped immediately. He looked at me like I was a problem he was calculating." The silence on Victor's end lasted exactly 3 seconds. "I see," he said. "I don't want to be in the middle of something I don't understand," she said. "You offered me a way out. I think I want to take it." "You made the right decision," Victor said. "I'm glad you called." "You said a few days," she said. "I can't disappear. Suddenly it would look strange. But if I have until Friday—" "Friday is fine," he said. "Emily, you're safe. I'm going to make sure of that personally." "Thank you, Victor," she said. She hung up and sat at her kitchen table and noted clinically that her hands were perfectly steady. She called Donovan. "He took it," she said. "How fast?" 3 seconds of silence after the bait, then total acceptance. She paused. "He's moving fast. Whatever his next phase is, it's close to executing." "Alexander wants to see you at noon," Donovan said. "I'll be there." She went to the restaurant first. She worked the morning shift, took orders, made coffee, talked to Rosa about the broken refrigerator hinge that had been on the repair list for 6 weeks, and let herself be normal for 2 hours because she had learned at the hospital that you cannot run at full tension indefinitely without the ordinary things becoming anchors. She needed the restaurant. She needed Rosa's voice and the smell of coffee and the familiar weight of ceramic mugs. She needed to remember what she was protecting. At 11:30, she walked out and got in the waiting car. The noon meeting was different from the others. Caruso had a board, an actual physical board, covered in photographs and financial documents and connection lines, which told her they had been working through the night. Ellis looked like he hadn't slept. Margaret Chen had 3 legal pads filled and a 4th open and ready. Donovan stood near the door with the particular stillness of someone who was bracing. Alexander was at the window. When she came in, he turned and looked at her with an expression she was still building vocabulary for something that had been developing over the last 3 days, from strategic assessment into something more layered and less classified. "You got him," he said. "I got him interested," she said. "That's not the same thing." "Walk us through it," Caruso said. She did. Every word, every pause, every second of silence on Victor's end. When she finished, Ellis read back his notes, and she confirmed the sequence. Margaret Chen wrote something in her new legal pad. "He's going to verify the meeting location," Alexander said. "Immediately," she said, "or he'll have someone verify it for him. He won't make the call personally." "Which means we have a narrow window between his verification and when he acts on it," Ellis said. 48 hours, Alexander said. "Donovan, the Wednesday meeting location moves tonight. New venue secured by morning. Anyone who had access to the original address gets individually recontacted through a channel Victor cannot touch." Donovan nodded and stepped out. "What do we know about his timeline?" Emily said. Caruso turned to the board. "Financial movement in the last 72 hours. 3 transfers through shell accounts, small amounts below reporting thresholds, but the pattern matches what we've seen before major operations. He's paying people." "How many people?" "At least 4 separate recipients. 2, we've identified private contractors' security background. 2 are still dark." "The contractors are for what comes after," she said. "After Alexander. He needs people to manage the transition of power who aren't organization insiders." "He's already positioned himself as the natural successor," Margaret said. "Informally. He's been doing it for months. Conversations, meetings, letting people know he's there, that he's reliable, that he's the continuity candidate. He's been running a campaign, Emily said. An extremely careful one, Margaret said. Emily looked at the board. At Victor's photograph in the center, the easy smile, the warm eyes, the face of a man who had spent 30 years being well-liked as a strategic instrument. He's going to contact me again before Friday, she said. He'll want another meeting. He'll want to give me the relocation details where he's planning to send me which of his resources he's using. He'll frame it as finalizing the arrangements, but what he's actually doing is making sure I'm controlled in the right place before he moves. Where do you think he plans to put you? Caruso said. Somewhere legitimate seeming, she said. Not a warehouse, not some safe house that looks like what it is. Victor is too clean for that. He'll put me somewhere comfortable, a hotel maybe, or a private residence he has a connection to, and he'll tell me it's for my safety. And it will be comfortable right up until the moment Alexander is gone, and he doesn't need me to be comfortable anymore. The room absorbed this. He won't hurt you before then, Alexander said. No, she said. I'm useful to him before then, after. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We're not going to let there be an after, Alexander said. She looked at him. The proof we need is his direct communication to the contractors, she said. Not the financial records, those are traceable, but deniable. We need him giving instructions that connect him to the Martino's hit and to whatever comes next. She paused. He's going to give those instructions verbally, in person, with someone he trusts completely. How do we get to that conversation? Ellis said. She thought about the coffee meeting, the ease of him, the things he'd revealed by being confident. We don't, she said. I do. Alexander turned from the board. When he calls for the second meeting, she said, I'm going to tell him I can't wait until Friday. I'm going to tell him I'm scared that Alexander said something this morning that frightened me, that I need to move sooner. Panic makes people generous with information. A frightened asset walking toward you is a gift. You want to reassure them. You want to make them feel the plan is solid. And when you're reassuring someone, you say more than you mean to. You're going to make him talk about the plan, Caruso said. I'm going to make him want to, she said. There's a difference. If I push him to talk, he'll notice the push. If I seem desperate enough that he needs to calm me down, that's when people explain their plans to someone who's scared, because the explanation is a form of control. She looked around the room. I need a wire, she said. Not obvious. And I need someone in position close enough that if something goes wrong, they can reach me in under 2 minutes. 2 minutes is a long time, Donovan said from the doorway. He had come back in quietly. I know, she said. So make sure nothing goes wrong. She turned to Alexander. I need one more thing from you, she said. Name it, he said. If I get what we need, if I come back with his voice on record, direct instructions, the full chain, I need to know what you're going to do with it. She held his gaze. Not what Caruso thinks should happen, not what the organization's standard response is. What you are going to do. The room was very still. I need to know, she said, that the answer is justice. Not because I have a problem with how this world operates, but because if Victor disappears into the Hudson, the way the shooter did, there are people connected to him, lawyers, contractors, a network he's been building for months, who will assume Alexander is the threat and will act accordingly. You need the record to be public, or public enough. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. You're thinking about the organization after this, he said. I'm thinking about what happens to you if this ends in a way that looks like murder rather than accountability, she said. Even if everyone inside knows why. The outside is watching too. Margaret Chen had stopped writing. She was looking at Emily with an expression of careful assessment. She's right, Margaret said quietly. Victor has relationships with people who are not inside this organization. If he disappears without a clear record of what he did, those people will draw their own conclusions. Alexander looked at the board for a long moment. When you get the recording, he said, it goes to Margaret first. She builds the file. Victor gets a choice of formal accounting within the organization, and a supervised exit with the recording as leverage. Or the recording goes to two specific individuals outside the organization who have been waiting for 15 years for a reason to look at Victor Valenti closely. He paused. He'll take the exit. And if he doesn't, Caruso said. Then the recording goes regardless, Alexander said, and Victor manages whatever follows. Emily absorbed this. That's the right answer, she said. I know, Alexander said simply. She left the building at 2 o'clock with a primary plan, 2 contingencies, and the knowledge that she was going to spend the next 24 hours inside a deception that had no room for error. Victor called at 4:15. I've been thinking about you, he said. How are you feeling? Honestly. She let her voice carry just enough tension. Not great. Alexander, this morning after I called you, he asked me questions about where I went yesterday, who I talked to. What did you tell him? That I went for coffee by myself, that I needed air. She paused. I don't think he believed me. What makes you say that? The way he looked at me when I came back, like he was recalculating something. She let a beat pass. Victor, I don't want to wait until Friday. I think he's starting to watch me differently, and if I'm still here by Friday... All right, Victor said immediately, no hesitation. All right, don't worry, we'll move faster. When? She said. Tomorrow evening, he said. I'll send a car. The driver is someone I trust absolutely. He'll bring you somewhere safe. You'll be comfortable, Emily, I promise you. It's a private residence, very quiet, completely separate from any of Alexander's connections. You'll have everything you need. And after, she said, after this situation resolves. A pause. Then, after this resolves, you'll be completely free. You can go back to your restaurant, your hospital, your life. This will be behind you, behind all of us. After this resolves. His voice when he said it was not unkind. It was the voice of a man who had made a decision he'd justified to himself so completely that he'd stopped hearing the justification, and now it was simply the truth. You sound certain, she said. I am, he said. I've been planning this for a long time, longer than you know. She felt her breath steady itself without her telling it to. That's reassuring, she said. You can trust me, Victor said. I knew your father, Emily. I am not going to let anything happen to you. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Thank you, Victor, she said. She hung up and texted Donovan. Tomorrow evening. Private car. He's sending a driver. I need the wire before noon tomorrow, and I need to know positioning. The reply came in under 60 seconds. Confirmed. You'll have everything. Don't contact the restaurant tonight. Stay in. She understood the instruction. Victor might have eyes on her building. She needed to appear exactly as she had said. She was a frightened woman staying close to home. She made dinner. She read. She went to bed at 10 and lay awake until midnight building and rebuilding the conversation she would need to have with Victor Valenti when he thought she was already his. The wire was brought to her apartment at 9 the next morning by a woman she had never seen before, early 40s, completely unremarkable in appearance, the kind of face that a witness would struggle to describe. She handed Emily a small case and talked her through the components in under 4 minutes, with the precision of someone who had done this many times. The transmitter activates automatically at this threshold, she said, pointing. If you're in a dead zone, signal stores and transmits when you move into range. The backup is here. If you feel the situation deteriorating, press this and hold for 2 seconds. It triggers an immediate response from the positioning team. How close will positioning be? Emily asked. As close as the environment allows, the woman said, which is Donovan's job, not mine. She closed the case. Any questions? What's your name? Emily said. The woman looked at her. You don't need my name. No, Emily said. But I'm going to be wearing something you built today, so I thought I'd ask. A pause. Something shifted slightly in the woman's expression. Vega, she said. Thank you, Vega. Vega left. Emily sat with the small device in her hand and thought about her father, about his hands teaching her to do careful things carefully, about the patience he had put into her, the slow and specific patience of someone building an instrument rather than raising a child, and how she had resented that understanding when it came, and how she no longer resented it. At 11, she got a text from an unknown number, new not Victor's line. An address in Brooklyn. A time 7 p.m. Below it, the driver's name is Reyes. He will identify himself. She forwarded it to Donovan. His reply, confirmed. We have the address. Positioning team is already moving. You'll see nothing but they'll be there. She spent the afternoon at the restaurant. She told Rosa she was going away for a few days, family thing. She said nothing to worry about, and watched Rosa accept this without questions, the way Rosa accepted most things that fell outside her designated zone of concern. She hugged Rosa for slightly longer than usual, and Rosa patted her back and said, "Eat something before you go. You look like you've been thinking too hard." She ate something. At 6, she went home and dressed carefully, not formally. Nothing that would look like she was prepared for anything other than what she'd claimed to be, which was a frightened woman following the instructions of someone she trusted. She checked the wire twice. She put on the boots her father had given her for her 21st birthday. At 6:58, a black car appeared on her street. The driver's window came down. A man in his 40s, steady eyes, the careful posture of someone whose job was to be unthreatening. "Miss Carter," he said. "I'm Reyes." She got in. She had done harder things. She reminded herself of that during the 40-minute drive sitting in the back seat of a car that was taking her to Victor Valenti's endgame with a wire under her shirt and a positioning team she couldn't see, and a backup button she hoped not to press. She had walked into Martino's on 20 seconds of instinct. She had done harder things. Victor was waiting for her at the private residence, a townhouse well-maintained, the kind of property that existed in a city the way certain men existed in organizations, comfortably without attracting attention, useful by virtue of its reliability. He met her at the door himself. "Emily." He took her hand in both of his. "I'm glad you're here. You're safe now. Thank you for doing this," she said. She let some of the tension she'd been holding show, not all of it, but enough to look like a woman who had spent a stressful 24 hours being frightened. He brought her inside. There was tea prepared, which was the correct hospitable touch, and he poured it himself, which was another correct touch, the gesture of a man who wanted her to feel cared for. She sat. She accepted the tea. She let the silence breathe. "How was Alexander when you left?" he said. "Distracted," she said. "He had people in and out all day. Something about a meeting on Wednesday." Victor was very still for 1/2 second. "A meeting," he said. "I don't know what kind. He didn't involve me." She paused. "Is that important?" "Probably not," Victor said. He set his tea down. "Tell me, in your time with Alexander, did he ever say anything to you about Marcus? His uncle?" She let her brow furrow slightly. "He mentioned him once. Said Marcus built the foundation of everything. Why, Marcus was going to change things," Victor said. "Before he died. He and I had conversations, long ones, serious ones, about a different structure, a different future for the organization. Marcus understood that the old way of doing things had a ceiling." He paused. "Alexander never understood that. He kept everything exactly as Marcus left it and called it loyalty. But really it was fear. Fear of change dressed up as reverence." She looked at him and said nothing and let him continue, because this was the moment she had been building toward, the moment when he believed she was solved and safe in his, when the plan was executing, and the control was established, and the pride of the long-running game was too much to contain. "I spent 9 years," Victor said, "watching Alexander hold this organization back, watching opportunities pass, watching men who were brilliant and capable get managed rather than empowered. And I stayed, because I genuinely believed that the right moment would come." "What changed?" she said softly. "Claire," he said. The name landed in the room. She kept her face at the right level of careful attention present, concerned a woman hearing something she's beginning to understand is significant. Claire was... He stopped, gathered himself. Claire was the extraordinary person. She was also the thing that was making Alexander smaller. Not because she was a problem, she wasn't, but because he loved her in a way that made him human in a situation that required him to be something else. And she was ill, very ill. He looked at his hands. I made a decision. In the window, when he was unavailable, I chose a course of care that I genuinely believed was the most merciful option. A medical decision, she said. Yes. And she died. Yes. He met her eyes. I have carried that for 9 years. The question of whether I was right. The knowledge that Alexander suspects me, and cannot prove it, and cannot let it go. His voice was level and honest in the particular way of someone who has rehearsed this confession enough times that it no longer frightens them. I am not a monster. I made a calculation. Perhaps the wrong one, I accept that possibility. But I made it for reasons I could defend. She looked at him. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because you deserve to know who you're trusting, he said. I'm not going to ask you to trust me blindly. You're Daniel Russo's daughter, you'd see through that immediately. He almost smiled. So, I'm telling you the truth. The real truth. And you can decide. It was extraordinary, she thought. The sheer craft of it. He was offering her a confession as a trust-building exercise, giving her something that looked like vulnerability while retaining all the control. Because the version he was confessing was the version where he was a tragic, morally complex man who made a difficult call, rather than a man who had made a cold calculation to remove an obstacle. The difference between those two versions was the difference between a hard choice and a murder. What happens to Alexander? She said. He'll be given an opportunity to step back, Victor said. With full dignity, with resources. Nothing violent, I want to be clear about that. I want this to be clean. He said it with complete sincerity. She believed that he believed it. She also knew that men who ordered professional shooters through insulated chains and cleaned up afterward with the efficiency they demonstrated in the Hudson did not typically conduct clean, dignified transitions. And the meeting on Wednesday, she said. He looked at her. The thing Alexander mentioned, she said. Should I be worried about being here about timing? Something shifted in his expression. Not alarm. Calculation. No, he said. Wednesday is actually helpful, in terms of timing. He stopped himself. A pause. Then, you're safe here, regardless of what happens Wednesday. What happens Wednesday? She said. He studied her. This was the pivot. She could feel it. He was deciding right now whether she was an asset or an audience. Whether to keep her just outside the plan or to let her fully inside it. She let herself look slightly lost, slightly young. The daughter of a man this world had taken sitting across from the person who offered shelter. Wednesday, Victor said carefully. There are people who are going to make Alexander an offer, a formal one, to stand aside. If he accepts, which I believe he will because the offer will be substantial and the alternative will be clear, then this is finished peacefully. He paused. If he doesn't accept, then there are contingencies. Contingencies, she said. Yes. The kind that happened at Martino's, she said quietly. He was very still. You know about Martino's, he said. I know something happened, she said. I was there. I saw people scrambling. I put it together. Emily. I'm not... She let her voice carry something that sounded like the specific desperation of a person who has gone too far to go back. I'm not asking you to explain. I'm asking if I'm safe here while Wednesday happens. He watched her for a long moment. You are completely safe, he said. The people Alexander is meeting Wednesday will make the offer. If it's accepted, this is over. If it isn't... He exhaled. If it isn't, then there are people in position who have specific instructions. Instructions, she said. Very specific ones, Victor said. And it will be clean. She held his gaze. I trust you, she said. She said it simply. She said it in the voice of Daniel Russo's daughter, who had spent a frightening week inside a world she'd tried to avoid. and who was grateful for a steady hand and a warm room and the assurance that the decision was already made. Victor looked at her with something that was genuinely warm. That was the worst part, she would think later, that the warmth was real. "Good," he said. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow this will be much clearer." She said goodnight. She was shown to a room on the upper floor, comfortable as he had promised, and also with a single window that faced an alley and a door with a lock that was, she noted, accessible only from the outside. She sat on the edge of the bed. She pressed the backup button, held it 2 seconds. Then she lay down fully clothed and waited. 11 minutes later, she heard a soft knock, not on the door, but on the window. She crossed to it and looked through the glass. One of the positioning team. She didn't know his face. He was just a man in dark clothes who put his hand flat against the glass for a moment. Contact confirmed. She was not alone. She lay back down. She stared at the ceiling and thought about what Victor had just told her. The offer on Wednesday. The people in position. The specific instructions. He had told her. Not everything. He was too smart for everything, but enough. Enough to build on. Enough that combined with the financial records, the floor manager's account, the shell company transfers, and his own voice on the wire describing a course of medical care chosen for a woman who was inconvenient, it was enough. It was enough. She thought about Alexander in his office saying I was unavailable in 2 flat words. She thought about Claire. She thought about her father's voice. The smiling ones are always the most dangerous because they need you to like them. A man who needs you to like him will do anything if he thinks you've stopped. Victor Valenti had never stopped needing to be liked. Not at 11 years old in Alexander's orbit. Not at 30. Not now at 55, with a plan in motion and a frightened woman he'd just confessed to, because the confession was a gift that made him likable, made him human, made him the complicated, tragic man rather than the cold, deliberate one. He needed her to like him even now. She had. That was the operation. That was the thing she had walked into his world to find, not just information, but the specific vanity of a man who couldn't execute his plan without an audience that admired him for it. She waited until 3 in the morning. Then she carefully removed the wire, packaged it exactly as Vega had shown her, and tucked it into the interior pocket of her jacket. The transmission was stored. Everything he had said from the moment she arrived was on it. She went to the window. The positioning team member was still there. She held up the jacket pocket. He nodded. 20 minutes later, the window was open and she was out and down and in a car that was not Rhea's car. Donovan was in the front seat. He turned and looked at her. "Got it," he said. "Got it," she said. He exhaled. The car moved. She looked out the window at the city, passing the 3 a.m. city, quiet and enormous and indifferent, and felt something she didn't immediately have a name for. Not relief, not triumph. Something more tired than both of those. Something that comes when a thing you have been holding with great care and precision for a very long time is finally allowed to be set down. "Alexander," she said. "He knows you're out," Donovan said. "He's been awake. The Wednesday meeting needs to be completely restructured," she said. "Victor has people in position. He gave me the shape of it, but not the details. We need to assume whoever is meeting Alexander has instructions to make an offer, and then if refused, act immediately." "We'll get the details," Donovan said. "The wire will give you the financial chain and the Martino's connection and the medical decision on Claire," she said. "It's enough for Margaret to build the file. It's enough for the external parties Alexander mentioned." "Yes," Donovan said. She was quiet. "He said it was merciful," she said. "What he did to Claire. He actually believes that." Donovan said nothing. "That's what makes him more dangerous than someone who knows they're wrong," she said. "He's constructed a version of events where everything he's done is justifiable. The assassination attempt, the plan for Wednesday. He genuinely believes he's the man who made a hard call and has been unfairly suspected for it, and everything since has been self-defense." "Does that matter?" Donovan said. She thought about it. "It matters for how he'll respond when Alexander confronts him," she said. "He won't break. He'll argue. He'll have the whole story ready, the version where he's the tragic figure. If Alexander goes in expecting contrition, he won't get it. I'll make sure Alexander knows that, Donovan said. The car stopped in front of her building. She didn't move immediately. Donovan, she said. After this, whatever happens after this, I need to go back to being Emily Carter. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. Nobody is trying to take that from you, he said. I know, she said. I just needed to say it out loud. She got out of the car. She went upstairs. She sat at her kitchen table in the 3 a.m. quiet and thought about everything that was going to happen in the next 48 hours and whether she had done everything she could to shape it toward the right outcome. Then her phone lit up. Alexander. She answered without speaking. You're home, he said. I'm home, she said. A pause that was not empty. Are you all right? He said. She thought about the question seriously, the way she thought about all serious questions. I will be, she said, when this is finished. Emily. His voice was quiet in a way it hadn't been before, quieter than strategy, quieter than calculation. The specific quiet of something that has had its defenses temporarily lowered by a late hour and a long week, and the particular relief of hearing a voice you hadn't let yourself admit you were waiting to hear. Thank you for what you did tonight. She looked at the kitchen table. Get some sleep, Alexander, she said. A pause. You too, he said. She hung up. She put her head down on her arms and closed her eyes and let herself be completely still for the first time in 4 days. No construction, no performance, no building of anything. Just the quiet kitchen and the city outside and the sound of her own breathing. Which was, she noted, finally steady in the way it hadn't been since she crossed the street 3 days ago and walked into a room she was never supposed to enter. Wednesday was coming, and for the first time since this began, she knew exactly what it would find. She slept 4 hours and woke up knowing something was wrong, not with the plan. The plan was intact. She had checked it in those 4 hours of sleep the way she always processed critical things, some part of her running the sequence, even in rest, looking for the flaw she'd missed while conscious. The plan was sound. Margaret had the wire. Ellis was building the secondary evidence chain. Donovan had restructured the Wednesday meeting protocols before sunrise. The external parties Alexander had mentioned, 2 individuals who had waited 15 years for a reason to look at Victor Valenti, had been contacted through Margaret's channel, and were now in possession of enough documentation to make the next 48 hours uncomfortable for Victor, regardless of anything else. The plan was fine. What was wrong was something quieter than the plan. She lay in bed for 3 minutes, identifying it the way she sometimes lay still at the hospital in the middle of a complicated case, not reaching for action, but letting the full shape of the situation come clear. What was wrong was that she was afraid. Not of Victor, not of Wednesday, not of the meeting or the contractors he'd positioned, or the clean transition he'd described with the confidence of a man who had already lived it in his imagination. She was professionally equipped for all of that. She had done harder things, and she knew it now without having to remind herself. What she was afraid of was simpler and considerably more inconvenient. She was afraid of what happened after. She had told Donovan she needed to go back to being Emily Carter. She had meant it. She had said it out loud at 3 a.m. as a kind of anchor, a declaration that the self she had built over 9 years was still there, still waiting, still hers. The restaurant, the hospital, the small manageable problems she permitted herself. But she lay in the early morning light and understood with the particular clarity that comes from not enough sleep and too much honest thinking that the person who had crossed the street 4 days ago was not the same person who was lying in this bed right now. Not worse. Not better necessarily. Just different in ways she hadn't fully cataloged. She had walked into Alexander Moretti's world on 20 seconds of instinct, and the world had recognized her, and she had recognized it back, and that recognition was not something you could unfeel. She got up. She made coffee. She called Rosa and said she'd be in for the afternoon shift, and Rosa said good because the refrigerator hinge was still broken, And also a man had come by asking for Emily, and Rosa had told him Emily was unavailable. She set the coffee down. "What man?" she said. "Said his name was Reyes, very polite. Said he worked for a friend of yours." "Victor's driver." Checking that she was still where she was supposed to be. "Thank you, Rosa," she said. "Don't tell him anything else. If he comes back, call me immediately." Rosa accepted this with the magnificent equanimity she brought to all of Emily's unusual requests. "Will do," she said, and hung up. Emily called Donovan. "Reyes came to the restaurant," she said. "Victor is verifying." "How long ago?" "Within the last hour." "Which means Victor woke up this morning and the first thing he did was check his pieces." "He's accelerating," Donovan said. "Yes." She thought about the timeline. He's not going to wait for Wednesday's offer to play out. He has people in position for a reason the offer is cover. It's the version he can describe as a good faith attempt. But the real plan was always the contingency. The offer is theater. "We've assumed that," Donovan said. "Assume it harder," she said. "And tell Alexander." She hung up. She stood in her kitchen with the coffee and thought about Reyes driving to her restaurant at 6 in the morning to verify her location and about what that meant for a man who was supposed to believe she was safely installed in his townhouse, resting comfortably. When had he found out she was gone? She thought backward. She had left at 3. The positioning team member had confirmed her exit. No alerts, no sounds from the house. Victor would have expected her to sleep until at least 8 would have had someone check on her. Her phone buzzed. Victor. She let it ring 4 times, long enough to seem like someone who had just woken up, short enough not to seem like someone avoiding the call. "Victor," she said, slightly groggy, slightly warm. "Emily." His voice was measured, controlled, not warm. "I went to check on you this morning and you weren't there." She let a pause sit. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I needed to get out. I went home. I know I should have told someone, She let her voice carry the right quality of embarrassed apology. "I felt trapped. I'm sorry. I didn't think." A silence on his end that told her everything she needed to know about where he was and what he was deciding. "You went home," he said. "Yes, I'm here now. I'm sorry, Victor. I just needed my own space. It was a lot to process. And Of course," he said. The warmth was back, but thinner now, working harder. "Of course I understand. Emily, I was concerned. After everything I told you last night, I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm all right," she said. "I'm sorry I worried you." "Don't apologize." He paused. "Stay home today. Don't go to Alexander. I'll reach out to you this afternoon and we'll finalize arrangements. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said. "Of course." She hung up and immediately called Donovan. "He believed it," she said. "Barely. He's trying to confirm my position and reestablish control before Wednesday. He's going to reach out this afternoon with revised arrangements for me." Which means he's moving the timeline up. Yes, whatever was supposed to happen Wednesday is happening sooner. She thought fast. "Donovan, the Wednesday meeting, does Alexander have a location Victor knows about?" "The original location that you gave Victor, which we relocated." "Victor's people are going to that original location," she said, "not to make an offer. They're going to make sure there's no Alexander at the end of Wednesday." Donovan was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'll tell him," he said. "Tell him now," she said. She was already putting on her coat. She took a route to Alexander's building that involved 2 subway changes and a 7-block walk, not because she was certain she was being followed, but because the probability was high enough to build for. She came in through the parking garage entrance. Donovan met her at the elevator. He looked like he had made 4 difficult phone calls in the last 20 minutes. "He knows," Donovan said. "Good. What's the response?" "Margaret is coordinating with the external parties to accelerate the file delivery. Ellis has pulled the financial chain, and it's clean. We can trace the contractor payments to Victor's holding company. 2 of the 4 contractors have been identified and are currently being approached." Approached, she said, persuaded to reconsider their current employment. She followed him to the elevator. Victor is going to realize the timeline has collapsed at some point today, she said. Either when his contractors go quiet or when his check on my location comes back inconsistent. When that happens, he becomes unpredictable. Right now, he's running a plan. A man running a plan is manageable. A man whose plan is falling apart is something else. I know, Donovan said. Where is Alexander? Waiting for you. He was in the conference room, not the office. The conference room, which meant there were people with him, which was correct, because the last thing Alexander needed today was to be isolated. Caruso was there, and Ellis and Margaret, and two men she hadn't seen before, who had the specific quality of people whose job was to be present when presence was the deterrent. Alexander looked at her when she came in and said nothing for a moment, and she understood in that moment that the not saying was itself a form of communication she was getting better at reading. Victor knows you left the townhouse, he said. He suspects. He doesn't know what it means yet. She sat. He's going to call me this afternoon with revised arrangements. That call is going to tell us how much he knows. And if he knows enough, then he accelerates past what we can manage from a distance, she said. Which means you need to move first. The room was quiet. Moving first means direct confrontation, Caruso said, which exposes. It exposes Alexander, she said. I know, which is why the timing has to be precise. She looked at Margaret. How long to finalize the file? The core documentation is complete, Margaret said. The wire recording the financial chain, the medical decision record, it's sufficient. I can have it in deliverable form in 4 hours. 4 hours, Emily said. She looked at Alexander. Can you get Victor to a meeting in 4 hours? He'll want to know why. Tell him you want to discuss the Wednesday meeting directly. Man to man, no staff. Tell him you've had concerns about the arrangement and you want to clear them. She paused. He won't be able to refuse. He needs to appear normal. He needs the offer on Wednesday to look like a legitimate first step. If he refuses a direct meeting with Alexander on a matter of organizational concern, it breaks the narrative he's been building. He'll come in armed with his story, Donovan said. He's been refining it for 9 years. I know, Emily said. Let him. Alexander looked at her. You want him to tell his version first, Alexander said. I want him to commit to his version, she said. On the record, in front of witnesses. His version is very good. It's carefully constructed, emotionally calibrated, designed to make him the tragic figure. But there's one thing his version can't survive. She held Alexander's gaze. Being placed next to the truth. A long silence. Set the meeting, Alexander said to Donovan. Donovan stepped out. Emily sat back. She thought about the wire recording. Victor's voice describing the medical decision with the particular honesty of a man who had told himself the story enough times that he could deliver it with clean hands. She thought about Claire's name in his mouth, said without flinching, with that curated sadness. She thought about Alexander, saying I was unavailable in 2 flat words, compressing the whole weight of it into the smallest possible space. Alexander, she said. He looked at her. When you're in the room with him, she said quietly, he's going to try to make you the villain of his story. He's going to tell you that everything he did, Claire the shooter, the plan for Wednesday, came from a place of grief and necessity. He's going to tell you that you've been so consumed by power and suspicion that you couldn't see what was right in front of you. She paused. He'll mean it. That's what makes it dangerous. He'll say things that have enough truth in them to land. And if you respond to the truth inside it, he'll use that response to shift the ground. She looked at him steadily. Let him finish. Don't respond to the truth until he's finished. Make him commit to the whole version before you say anything. Alexander was quiet for a moment. And then, he said. Then you put the file on the table, she said. He held her gaze. You've done this before, he said, not accusingly. observationally. My father used to practice it with me, she said. He'd tell me a story that was mostly true and ask me to find the place where the mostly broke down. She paused. He said the most important thing was not to react to the true parts. Because a person watching you react to the true parts will always assume you haven't found the false ones. Daniel Russo, Alexander said quietly, almost to himself. What an education he gave you. He gave me the only one I didn't ask for, she said. It turned out to be the most useful. The 4 hours went fast. Margaret and Ellis worked. Caruso coordinated with the 2 men she didn't know. Emily sat at the conference table and drank 3 cups of coffee and reviewed the full evidence file, once carefully the way she reviewed critical patient charts, not looking for what she already knew was there, but checking for what she might have missed. She hadn't missed anything. At 2:45, Donovan came back in. Victor confirmed the meeting, he said. 3:30. He wants to meet here. He wants the home ground, Caruso said. He's trying to control the environment. Let him have it, Emily said. He's been in this building 100 times. He's comfortable here. Comfortable people make mistakes. He asked if you'd be there, Donovan said. Emily looked up. What did you tell him? Alexander said. I said I'd check. She and Alexander looked at each other. He wants to know what position I'm in, she said. Whether I'm with you or with him. If I'm here, it means I didn't tell you what he told me last night. It means I'm still playing the frightened woman who took his offer. She thought for a moment. I should be here. It's a risk, Donovan said. It's information, she said. If Victor comes in and sees me sitting with Alexander, he knows the operation has collapsed and he has nothing left to lose. If he comes in and sees me sitting somewhere that suggests I'm still his, still the frightened woman, he'll be managing 2 stories simultaneously, and that's a cognitive load that produces errors. Where do you want to be? Alexander asked. She thought about it. Near the door, she said. Not at the table. Somewhere that looks like I arrived recently, like I came to Alexander because I was nervous and needed reassurance. But I'm not fully in his confidence. Uncertain. Mid-crossing. Alexander looked at her for a moment. You're remarkable, he said. She registered the word, filed it, did not respond to it. 3:30, she said. I'll be in position. Victor arrived at 3:28. She heard his voice in the hallway. The warm, even voice, the one that had been performing reliability for 30 years. And she noted that it was slightly more controlled than usual. Working harder. The ease was still there, but it was load-bearing ease, the kind that takes effort to maintain. She was seated in a chair near the windows, slightly apart from the table where Alexander sat. Caruso was at the table. Margaret was in the corner. Donovan stood near the door. When Victor walked in, his eyes moved immediately to Emily. She let her expression be what it needed to be, slightly relieved to see him slightly anxious, the face of someone who had come to Alexander with questions, but was glad Victor was here. She watched him process this, watched his shoulders drop a fraction. He believed it. Alexander, he said, extending his hand across the table. Thank you for making time. Of course, Alexander said. He shook Victor's hand. His voice was even. His face was even. Nothing in his posture or expression suggested anything other than a man having a necessary organizational conversation. He was extraordinary at this. Victor sat. I understand you have concerns about Wednesday, Victor said. I want to reassure you the arrangement is sound. The individuals we're meeting have been thoroughly vetted. This is a legitimate opening for... Tell me about Claire, Alexander said. The room went absolutely still. Victor stopped mid-sentence. He recovered in approximately 1 second, which told her how many times he had anticipated this question. How many times he had rehearsed the answer. Claire, he said. His voice shifted not dramatically, but into the register of a man accessing genuine pain. Alexander, I've wanted to talk to you about Claire for 9 years. You know that. Tell me, Alexander said. I made a decision in a window when you weren't reachable, Victor said. A decision I have questioned every single day since. She was suffering. The options the primary team presented were the continuation of aggressive treatment was causing her enormous pain with diminishing returns. The facility I chose had a palliative approach that I believed was more humane. He paused. I was wrong to not wait for you. I will live with that. But the decision itself, I made it with care. I made it because I loved her too. Not the way you did, but she was... He stopped, composed himself. She mattered. Alexander said nothing. You've suspected me, Victor said. I know. I've felt it for 9 years. And I have stayed because I believed I still believe that you know, somewhere underneath the suspicion, that I am not the monster you've been afraid I am. I made a terrible mistake, but not a crime. He delivered it perfectly. He was good. He was so extraordinarily good that Emily felt the specific cold recognition of someone watching a master at work. The truth inside the false inside the true, woven together so skillfully that responding to either one without the whole picture was impossible. She looked at Alexander. Alexander looked at Victor for a long, unreadable moment. You chose that facility, Alexander said, in a 72-hour window when you knew I was unreachable. You had power of attorney for one specific decision care placement. You chose a facility with a financial connection to a holding company in your name. Victor's face didn't move. The money, he started, was not significant, Alexander said. I know. That's what made it so hard to understand for a long time. Why a man who had access to substantial resources would route a small amount through a connection like that. It didn't look like greed, it looked like something else. He paused. It looked like the kind of arrangement you make when the money isn't the point. When the point is something the facility will do or not do for the person inside it. Victor said nothing. The facility's palliative approach, Alexander said, which you said you chose for her comfort. The records show that the protocol they used for patients with her condition typically extended life by 4 to 8 months with managed pain. He leaned forward slightly. Claire died 11 weeks after she arrived, which is inconsistent with that protocol, unless certain elements of the standard protocol were adjusted. Medical outcomes are variable, Victor said. His voice was still even, still controlled. You cannot... I have the file, Victor. It was the quietest thing Alexander had said in the room. It was also the most final. Victor looked at the table. A long silence. The wire recording from last night, Alexander said. You told Emily and I want to thank you for telling her, because you told her the true version, not the version you've been telling yourself. You told her you made a calculation. You said perhaps the wrong one. You said you accepted that possibility. He paused. That's not the language of a man who chose a care facility for comfort. That's the language of a man who made a different kind of decision. Victor looked up. For the first time since he had walked into the room, his face was not performing anything. What was underneath it was not what Emily had expected. She had expected defiance, or the cold calculation of a man assessing escape routes. What she saw was something that looked astonishingly like exhaustion. She was going to survive, Victor said. The room waited. The aggressive treatment was working, he said, slowly. The primary team believed she had. They thought there was a real possibility she would recover. Not fully, but substantially. Enough. He stopped. And I knew that if she recovered, Alexander would become soft. In a way that this organization could not afford. In a way that Marcus would never have allowed. He looked at his hands. I told myself it was mercy. I told myself she was suffering. And she was suffering, that part was true. But the reason I made the call? He stopped. The reason, Alexander said. Was you, Victor said. I did it because I was afraid of what you would become with her in your life. Afraid of what the organization would become. Afraid that Marcus's legacy would be dismantled by a man who was in love. He exhaled. I told myself it was strategic. And then I told myself it was mercy. And then I told myself it was the right call. And I have been telling myself versions of those things for 9 years, because the alternative... He stopped. "The alternative," Emily said. He looked at her. She had not spoken since he'd arrived. Her voice in the room landed with a weight she hadn't calculated. "The alternative," she said quietly, "is that you knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway, and none of the stories you've been telling yourself change what it was." The silence was complete. Victor looked at her for a long moment. "Your father," he said, "would have understood." "My father," she said, "made choices he couldn't fully justify too, but he never dressed them up as mercy." She held his gaze. "He always knew what they cost." Victor looked back at the table. Donovan placed the file in front of Alexander. "The external parties have received the documentation," Margaret said from her corner. Her voice was calm and clear. "The financial chain, the wire recording the medical records, the contractor payment history connecting to the Martino shooting." She paused. "It's comprehensive." Victor stared at the file. "Your options," Alexander said, "are a formal accounting within this organization, supervised and documented, followed by a complete exit. Full terms. No further contact with any organizational personnel or interests. In exchange, the external file stays where it is available, but not activated unless you violate the terms." "And if I refuse," Victor said. "The file activates," Alexander said, "and you manage whatever follows, which will be extensive given what's in it." Victor was quiet for a very long time. She watched him. In those minutes, watched the last stages of a plan collapsing. Watched the man underneath the plan, making the calculations that were now the only calculations available to him. He was not stupid. He had never been stupid. He understood exactly what the file contained, and exactly what exposure meant. He also understood something else, she thought. Something that showed in his face in the quiet, not the loss of power, not the legal exposure, but the specific grief of a man who has finally run out of the story he was telling himself. When there is no version left where you are, the tragic figure making hard choices, you are left with the version where you are simply the person who did the thing. "I'll take the terms," Victor said. Alexander nodded. Margaret produced the documentation. Victor signed it. He stood to leave, and he looked at Emily. One more time, really looked at her without the performance, without the calculation, in the specific way of someone acknowledging something they have no words for, and then he was gone. The room exhaled. Caruso said something to one of the men by the door. Ellis closed his laptop. Margaret began organizing the signed documentation with the efficient care of someone who understood what she was holding. Emily sat very still. She felt Alexander looking at her before she turned to confirm it. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she agreed. She waited for the relief to arrive fully, and felt instead the complicated mixture she'd been anticipating since 3 in the morning. Not triumph, not resolution, but the strange weightlessness of a thing that had been held for so long you didn't know what your hands felt like without it. She thought about Claire, about the version where she survived where the treatment worked, and she came back, and Alexander became, as Victor had said, softer, warmer, different. She thought about whether that Alexander would have crossed the street in 40 seconds, or whether he would have been a different kind of man entirely. She thought that the particular cruelty of Victor's logic was that it was not entirely wrong about the facts, only entirely wrong about what they meant. Softness was not danger. Love was not a strategic weakness. Those were the conclusions of a man who had spent so long in a world that rewarded hardness that he had forgotten hardness was a posture, not a truth. She stood and gathered her jacket. "Emily," Alexander said. She turned. The room had mostly cleared. Donovan and Caruso were in the hallway. Ellis had followed. Margaret was at the far end, managing her files. It was as close to a private moment as this building seemed to generate. He crossed to where she was standing and stopped at a distance that was not quite formal and not quite something else. "I know you said you needed to go back to being Emily Carter," he said. "I did say that," she confirmed. "I'm not going to ask you to be anything other than what you choose," he said. "I want that to be clear. What you did, what you chose, every step of it, It was yours. You weren't recruited. You weren't obligated. You made decisions, and you made them exactly the way your father apparently taught you to, which is to say better than anyone had a right to expect. She looked at him. But, she said. He almost smiled. That fraction again. The ghost of it. But, he said, I would like to see you again. Not because of the organization, not because of what happened, not because of your father, or your name, or any obligation. Just, he paused. I would like to have coffee, at a restaurant where nobody is going to get shot. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the 9 years of careful, contained life. The small problems she'd permitted herself. The distance she'd maintained from everything that might reach into the places she'd sealed off. She thought about crossing the street. She thought about the fact that the most defining moment of her life had come from a 20-second instinct, and that the instinct had been right, and that all her careful construction had not protected her from the world, it had only delayed the moment when the world found her anyway. She thought about what her father had said. 9 times out of 10 you'll be more than fine. But the 10th time, I want someone who understands this world to be paying attention. She thought about Alexander paying attention. Quietly, consistently for 7 years, in the way that asked nothing of her, but also refused to leave. She thought about the most feared man in New York, asking her to have coffee. One condition, she said. Name it, he said. I pick the place, she said. He looked at her. You always pick the place, he said. I know, she said. That's the condition. And Alexander Moretti, the man who had controlled the East Coast's most powerful organization for nearly a decade, the man who had sat across from Victor Valenti for 9 years, carrying a grief so compressed it had no visible surface. The man who had spent his entire adult life being feared by people who would never be permitted to know him, that man smiled. Not the fraction, not the ghost. He smiled in a way that changed his face completely, in the way that a thing changes when it has been held under pressure for so long that the first moment of release looks like an entirely different object than the one that was constrained. It was the most unguarded thing she had seen him do. She noted it in the place where she kept the things she didn't have words for yet and thought that she would probably need more words going forward. She thought she could manage that. She left first. She took the subway home. She sat in the noise and movement of the car and let the city carry her the way it always had. Indifferent, enormous, full of lives that had nothing to do with hers, and everything to do with what made hers possible. She thought about Rosa, and the broken refrigerator hinge, and the Thursday couple who came every week, and the way the espresso machine sounded in the morning when the restaurant was still empty and the day had not yet decided what it was going to be. She thought about the hospital, the emergency room, the cases that came through the door without warning and required everything you had and rewarded not the people who had planned for every outcome, but the people who could think clearly inside the chaos of the one that arrived. She had spent 9 years trying to live a life with no chaos in it. She had crossed a street and discovered she didn't know how. At her stop, she came up into the late afternoon air and walked the 4 blocks to the restaurant. She came in through the front. Rosa was behind the counter, and she looked up when Emily entered, and something in Rosa's face asked the question that Rosa would never ask aloud. "I'm all right," Emily said. Rosa nodded. She poured a coffee without being asked. Emily sat at the counter. She thought about her father. She thought that if he were here, if she could call him right now and tell him the whole story from the window to the car, to Martino's, to the wire, to Victor Valenti's face in the moment when the last version of his own story ran out, she thought he would listen to the whole thing without interrupting. She thought he would pour himself something and sit across from her, and when she finished he would be quiet for a moment the way he was always quiet after the important things. And then she thought he would say, "You used your eyes. You did what I gave them to you for." And she thought she would say, "I know, Dad." And he would say, "That's enough." And it was. She drank her coffee. Outside the window, New York moved in its vast and perpetual way, the city that never resolved, never finished, never stood still long enough to be fully known. She had lived inside it for 28 years, and it was still surprising her. That was the thing she had always loved about it, that she had forgotten to notice somewhere in the 9 years of careful construction. The world was larger than the life she'd been living. She had known that. She had just been afraid of it. 2 days later, Alexander Moretti walked into the restaurant at 9 in the morning, 7 minutes after Rosa unlocked the front door. He was in a different coat than any she had seen him in, before less formal, the coat of a man who was going somewhere ordinary on a Tuesday morning, rather than conducting the business of an organization. He sat at the counter. Rosa looked at him, looked at Emily, said nothing. Turned to the espresso machine with the magnificent discretion that had made her indispensable for 11 years. Emily set a menu in front of him. "You don't have to do that," he said. "It's how we do things here," she said. He looked at the menu for a moment. "What would you recommend?" he said. "The eggs," she said. "Rosa's been making them the same way for 20 years. My father used to say they were the one thing in his life he never wanted to change." He looked up from the menu. "All right," he said. "The eggs." She put the order in. She refilled the coffee for the couple by the window. She checked on table 3. She did the ordinary work of the restaurant with the ordinary attention she had always given it, and Alexander Moretti sat at her counter and drank his coffee and watched, and she let him watch, because she had realized some days ago that being watched by him was not the same as being managed by him. Watching was how he paid attention, and attention, she was beginning to understand, was the specific language of a man who had spent his whole life being feared by people who would never be permitted to know him, and who was in the careful and cautious way of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, figuring out how to set it down. Rosa brought the eggs. He ate them without comment for a moment. Then he was right. "My father," she said. "They're the best thing I've eaten in a long time," he said. She looked at him, and something in her chest did the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency since this began, that complicated wordless thing she was building vocabulary for. "Good," she said. "Come back Thursday. The couple by the window has been coming every Thursday for 6 years. You'd like them." He looked at the couple, at their easy habitual presence, at the coffee and the table they had claimed as theirs. "All right," he said. "Thursday." And Emily Carter, who was also Emily Russo, who was the daughter of a man who had given her eyes that could see what others missed, and hands that never shook when it mattered, who had crossed a street on 20 seconds of instinct and walked into the most defining week of her life, and come out the other side without losing the person she had built herself into. She turned back to her restaurant and her customers and the ordinary, irreplaceable work of the life she had chosen. And she was not afraid. She had saved a stranger's life with a kiss, and the stranger had turned out to be the most feared man in New York, and the most feared man in New York had turned out to be someone she wanted to know. And now she did. That was the story. That was all of it. And it was by any measure she had enough.